morning, and we thank you for the opportunity to do so. So as you will remember, 14 schools were approved. Of those 14, 7 actually opened their doors in either August or September of last year. And those schools represent 7 of our North Carolina counties. You'll scroll down a bit, Ashley. Of those 14, we did have 6 schools who were listed there who requested and received a delay. We additionally have this year 2 from the original Cohort 2020 who also requested and received a delay year 2. So Wake Prep and North Raleigh are now in Cohort 2022, and Cohort 2021 has all of the delay year 1 schools. As you'll also recall, Kaleidoscope Charter High School was not recommended to move forward in the RTO process. So we did send a brief survey to these schools, and you can see there from the pie chart, schools were asked if they were in their permanent or temporary facility as of February, and only 2 schools at this point are still in a temporary facility. That would be Revolution Academy and Wilmington School of the Arts. And Wilmington, as you know from school leader Susan Hogan, is in the process of negating some leases. There were some zoning issues, and Revolution had a delay in construction. So most of our schools, majority of our schools, are in their permanent facility. Schools were also asked about their temporary facility, and I wanted just to kind of underscore how important those contingency plans are that we have in the RTO process, because the majority, except for 1 school, which was Cardinal Charter at Wendell Falls, opened in a contingency facility. So again, all schools relied, except for 1, on their contingency backup plans. Thanks, Ashley. You can scroll down. Again, schools were asked about projected enrollment versus actual, and you can see there the breakdown of the schools either anticipating, exceeding anticipated, having fewer students come in than they thought, or about right. Actual numbers were right at what they anticipated. I also asked our school leaders to provide their PMR, so their principal's monthly report for month 1 enrollment versus their current enrollment as of last week. And of course, we can put into the bucket here the pandemic and what that has done across the state in terms of enrollment. But you get a very good picture of what their current and their first month enrollment stands at. Can you scroll down a bit, Ashley? Schools were also asked about instruction during the pandemic. And of course, we had option A for K through 5, which came into play in November. We had option B, the hybrid, and we had option C, which was purely virtual. Most of our schools, as you can see, opted for B, almost all of them. Some of them went for A when it became available, and a lot of them also began the school year virtually and then pivoted to option B. So that also provides a little data about what our charters are doing in the 2020 cohort. Teacher recruitment efforts were also a topic of the survey, and you can see that only 1 school there, as of the survey administration in February, said that they were not able to fill 100% of the positions. So 14.3% just represents 1 school. So teacher recruitment efforts were successful. Administrative turnover and leadership is a perennial challenge, and in terms of actual leadership, and I apologize there's a typo and an issue with that. We only had 2 schools who had leaders who were not identified as school leaders during the RTO process. MENA, Dr. Sean Williams, has stepped into the leadership role there, and Wilmington School of the Arts, Susan Hogan, has stepped into the leadership role there. 1 school identified turnover on their team, a director of academics. That was for Movement Eastland. And if you just scroll down a bit more. And then, of course, turnover with boards. We asked if they had added members, lost members. None of them reported having trouble following the open meetings law. Most of them are actively looking to fill a position or 2. And a majority of them report meeting monthly with a quorum Schools were also asked to speak to their efforts and the community involvement levels, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. Majority of them reported community involvement as very high. And we had a question regarding the NC access. 6 out of the 7 schools are NC access schools. Only 1, Revolution Academy, is not an NC access school. Schools also reported that if they needed to run a lottery this year, in which event their applications exceeded their available spots, they did so in a weighted format because they were recipients of the NC Access grant. So that also gives you a little bit of data about those 2020 schools and the grant. If you'll just continue down a bit, Ashley. And that just breaks down the specific schools who ran. I'm sorry, can you go back up just a moment? Thanks. So you can see Achievement, Movement, and Wilmington did not have applications that exceeded their available seats. Alamance ran a weighted lottery for kindergarten, and then you can see Cardinal Charter, MENA ran lotteries, Revolution did, but it wasn't weighted. Again, Revolution was the only school that was not an NC access school. Importantly, in the first year, of course, budget adjustments. They were asked what kind of budget adjustments. This was a qualitative type answer, and you can see what the schools provided. Obviously, some staffing changes, budget adjustments due to the pandemic. That 4th check mark down is Wilmington. Reallocation of benefits, negating 2 active building leases. So they had to do quite a bit of rearranging at that school. And then you can see if they had any wisdom that they gleaned from the process regarding marketing. And of course, again, putting this into perspective, we're in a pandemic year. So you can see there what the school spoke to in terms of their marketing strategies, utilizing social media. Scroll down a little bit more, Ashley. Thanks. And what their wisdom was to the next cohort coming through. The last checkpoint there, I think our success with marketing was the virtual meetings we held to answer questions, get to know the parents. We had to get creative this year, and I think that is probably the bottom line for all of our schools. Positive feedback, our biggest marketing tool. And of course, the ability to remain in person if they were able to. And last but not least, because we solicit feedback for continuous improvement, we wanted to ask our schools how we could better serve their school. And I would say that the last check mark there, it would be great to have a meeting to connect with the other schools that opened this year. So this year's cohort, CC Armour, one of our new leaders, has already undertaken to create a new charter leader cohort 2021 so that they can network. Obviously, everything is virtual this year, and we will be, from this point forward, facilitating those collaborative networks for our new charter leaders so that they do have more time to share thoughts and feedback with each other. That's all I have. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. It's all things considered, given the context of these schools opening, it certainly, in my mind, is quite impressive. Great work, Claire, to have so many schools that were frankly close to their target opening number and seem to be surviving and going to be able to go in a year or two. I would not have wished opening in COVID for your first year on anyone.
Thank you, Chair Quigley, and yes, they have done an amazing job.
Yeah. Just a plug for strong authorization and making sure we pick the top applicants, because those are the ones that are going to be able to survive in the midst of virtually any circumstances. Great.
section, good morning, and I hope everyone is safe and sound during these times. But hopefully the Department of Health and Human Services metrics are indicating that better times are ahead. You know, although Mr. Machado and I have collaborated on several issues, this visit to you is long overdue. Mr. Machado and I have another commonality in that we both are Western Carolina University Catamount alums. Just thought I'd throw that in there. The program is coming up on 100 years in existence, having significant milestones along the way, leading us to 1992 when the program was de-emphasized and not allowed to be included in the graduation requirements. Many teens see this as a rite of passage, and its importance was again confirmed last year when COVID brought the world to its knees. A significant focus from parents prompted a special statute to allow behind-the-wheel instruction. This is a very unique program here at DPI as it serves as most likely the first opportunity for students to begin the transition to their adult lives. Results from a recent survey in our section found that the ability to get around or having a driver license is considered an essential life skill for young adults. So, and I have the honor of leading a program in a significant reformation project, which will no doubt impact the program for the next 20 years, as quoted by a recent legislator. Next slide, Ashley. So in true educator fashion, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then we're going to tell you, and then we're going to review what I told you. So these are the areas which we'll briefly visit today during this presentation. I'll try not to get too granular, but we'll try to address some of the issues that have been brought to my office's attention over the past several years, and try to just give you an idea of how we can alleviate those. I was listening to your mission statement and your vision earlier, but our mission statement in driver education: develop and administer a high-quality driver education program to ensure that all drivers are provided with the necessary tools that will allow them to safely and efficiently operate a motor vehicle on the highways. Next slide, Ashley. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, in cooperation with the stakeholders involved in driver education, will seek a consensus in planning. So you are involved in this process. Next slide, Ashley. Just to go down very quickly with the goals, we have a strategic plan that we are charged with implementing. We are highly involved in teacher credentialing. We're looking forward to Mr. Tomlin's presentation next. We'll collaborate with him significantly over the past couple of years to begin a teacher certification program, which I'll tell you about in just a few minutes. There are some high priority issues within the driver education program. We're going to identify some of those over the next few years, and we'll be implementing those into the program. We are in the process of ensuring that our program is meeting or trying to come up to the national standards. We will be looking into the future needs of the program as driving, as you know, has changed significantly over the past even 10 years, let alone the last 40 years, or since the program's existence over the last 100 years. We coordinate with the driver licensing and the Division of Motor Vehicles areas. There are several items which could possibly assist in the elimination of duplicate processes and the streamlining of the licensing process. And I'll get on down to the last one there. We have, in addition to our short-term goals, we have 10 and 15-year horizon goals for North Carolina. So we're quite excited about the work we have before us. Next slide, Ashley, thank you. There are two items that are written in stone. There are general statutes regarding driver education, and then there's state board policy. The state superintendent shall organize and administer the program, and our section is also focused to ensure that we are aligned with Superintendent Truitt's goals and initiatives. So we will do our part to address the issues presented by Leandro versus North Carolina, as the program can play a significant role in addressing these systemic issues in our state. The purpose of the program shall be to provide a the education and training in traffic safety education for all the state students. There is General Statute 115C-215 that outlines the State Board of Education responsibility as well as the superintendent's. All students enrolled in a student in North Carolina, whether it be public, charter, private, home, and federal school students, are allowed to take our driver education program. They must be at least 14 years of age and 6 months. The local boards of education where your charter school is located, let me repeat that. The local board of education where your charter school is located is required to offer your students access to the program, as long as they have not been previously enrolled. We serve 140,000 students eligible every year. We have 1,300 teachers, and we have a $27 million budget. After this presentation, or after the advisory committee is over, you can visit our website at the Department of Public Schools, and you can find more information under the driver education section on how to order driver eligibility certificates and a number of other items that you may have questions about. Next slide, Ashley. Our staff, which I'm very proud of, is very small, but we are highly recognized. Our state is recognized as a significant leader in traffic safety education in this country. In fact, we were recently announced as the head and shoulders above everyone else in implementing the national standards by the National Team Driver Education and Training Administration Standards. By the way, the entire DPI staff has been selected to serve on the Association of National Stakeholders in Traffic Safety Education revamping the national standards. And at least one of our staff is currently serving to assess other states with technical assistance as well. Next slide, Ashley. Since I'm speaking to your advisory committee and stakeholders, our advisory committee is comprised of 19 members. It has 12 representing 12 agencies. We will be losing 5 members this June, one of which is a DPI seat. So if I could put out a little bit of an ad here, as I mentioned to Mr. Machado and Ms. Vaccaro, that we'd like to fill it with a representative from the charter schools area. So if you're interested, please contact the charter schools or the driver education office, and we can give you some more information on what that commitment would look like. Next slide, Ashley. There are 2 pathways for students to get a driver license, driver education in North Carolina, which are acceptable for licensing. There's the public school program, and then there's the DMV commercial schools. The public school program is offered at each of the 115 LEAs at no cost. However, the local Board of Education may charge a fee up to $65 to offset local costs. If they do charge a fee, then they are required to have some kind of waiver or a reduction based on economics. Okay, next slide, Ashley. Driver eligibility has been a significant topic over the last few years, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to separate driver education from driver eligibility. However, you will order the driver ed certificates from the DPI driver education website. This is a dropout prevention initiative. So you'll find guidance on the DPI website for administration of the driver eligibility program as well as ordering certificates. As far as issuance is concerned, you are required to issue a certificate to teens who are seeking to be licensed. It has an expiration date of 30 days. I would highly recommend that you would wait till your students complete the course, including the driving piece, before you issue this form so so that they can go get their license at the license office. You are also required to report students to the Division of Motor Vehicles who are no longer meeting the requirements toward graduation. There have been no adjustments to this policy due to COVID-19. However, we highly recommend that you read the hardship exemption and the other alternatives, options mentioned in this policy prior to notifying the Division of Motor Vehicles. Once you notify them, there are only two options for the license of the student to be reissued, and they both involve a restoration fee, or it is you have to go in through our help desk at DPI to have that submission removed, and it's a complicated process. All of this takes place in SADLS, and that's the State Automated Driver License System. If you do not have access to SADLS, please contact the help desk, and they will help get you set up with a RACF ID number. Next slide, Ashley. So as of March 1st of 2021, almost all of our districts have restarted their classroom and behind-the-wheel courses. The districts are following the guidelines provided by DPI. As mentioned, the legislature passed a special provision last summer requiring DPI to provide guidance to restart the behind-the-wheel phase, as social distancing is not possible in a motor vehicle. A 4-month delay caused a significant backlog of almost 10,000 students per month. Many of our smaller counties have cut significantly into those backlogs, but our larger districts are still struggling to get back to normal. They'll continue working hard to serve their students, and DMV has also been significantly impacted and are currently seeking alternative solutions through legislation to cut into the backlog of kids needing the road test. And one more, Ash. I understand that Dr. Tomlin next will discuss some licensure. However, we've enjoyed collaborating with his team over the last few years, like I said, to implement a new teacher ed program. As you were listening to this presentation, although our program is not currently part of the graduation requirements, we do adhere to the same policies regarding teacher ed and teacher credentialing. We have a teacher education program for driver education, where teachers can receive an add-on to their license for completing our course. It replaces the 3 university programs that went away, the last one being in 2013 at East Carolina University. Our program is one of the very few in the country. I believe there's only 2 at the college and university level. If any of your teachers are interested in adding on to the license, then please contact us as well for that. Next slide. Getting down to most recent times, the General Assembly right now is entertaining four pieces of legislation that will impact our program. So we're currently monitoring Senate Bill 37 for in-person learning. We have, in the past, as I stated, we have provided the districts with guidance on operating their classrooms. Most of them are doing at least remotely. Some are looking to move back into a plan B at this time. The behind the wheel is continuing to move forward. Once we receive further information from the Department of Health and Human Services and the CDC, we'll make adjustments to this to make sure that all students and teachers are safe in their learning environments. We're also looking into Senate Bill 69. This is the DMV alternative to third-party, which will allow third-party road testing. Right now, DMV is doing very few road tests, if any, at the local levels. So there's a backlog there as well. during the month of June and July, this will significantly impact our program. So we will be monitoring those and providing guidance to those districts that are going to be impacted those. And last but not least, this Senate Bill 20 is the Hands-Free Act. This doesn't impact the students in the 16 to 18-year-old range very much because they're already under the guidelines that are being set in this Hands-Free Act. However, it will impact you as an adult. So we are continuing to monitor these, and we will educate and keep the districts up to date as needed. And that will bring us up to the parking lot. So if there are any questions, comments, whatever, you can direct those to our email addresses listed there, or actually, I'm not familiar with the process here, but I'm willing to answer a few questions if needed.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. Appreciate that.
Chair.
And just want to open it up. I know my son has done driver's ed through a partnership with his charter school through a private agency, and that was one option, and the district was an option, and the school seemed very well equipped to deliver that information and support us, and so at least from the ground level, I know something's going well there. And someone else just said in the chat box here, Terry, did you want to share that comment from the group?
Yeah, I just think that despite the challenges, the driver's education program that my son is in his district has been fantastic. I really commend not only the district, but all the private sector driver's education programs have really worked together and to make sure that students who need to get the kind of training to be safe on the road receive it. So really hats off to Mr. Logan, his staff, and to everyone statewide who works on this critical issue.
Thank you very much.
Alex, I have a question for Mr. Logan, if I may.
Yeah.
Mr. Logan, hi, this is Sherry. First of all, I'd like to say, down east here, we have started doing our driver's ed program through virtually, and have been able to get a lot of my students back into the classroom. But I had a question regarding I think there was talk about the stipulations changing. Currently it's like 75% that they have to be passing. Any change to that rule due to COVID?
No, that's the one I had mentioned. There have been no changes to state board policy regarding this dropout prevention initiative.
Okay.
I would highly recommend that you go into state board policy under that particular policy. It's DRIVE, DRIV 004, and under items 3 and 4, I believe, are your hardship exemptions, and number 4 is allows quite a bit of flexibility from the school level to make adjustments. I would highly recommend you review those.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Chairman, this is Dave Michelle. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cheryl, was that you? You go.
No, it was Rita. You can go, Dave.
Okay. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Logan. From time to time, there's some misunderstanding between the LEAs and whether they should be providing a service for charter school students, and he has always handled that very professionally and advocated for our students. So I really appreciate it. I want to go on record thanking Mr. Logan for collaboration and so forth.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. I look forward to continue working with the charter school area and as well as renew my request for someone from the charter schools to sit on our advisory committee. But yes, this is we want to ensure that all students, we drive on the same road. I want to ensure that all students have the same opportunities. And our funding does cover public and private school students. we give everybody the same equal opportunity. Thank you for bringing that up.
And Mr. Logan, this is Rita Hare. Thank you for your presentation. It's very informative. I just had a quick question about slide 11. You said that across the state, our systems have restarted, and I see one no on there. It looks like it might be Washington County.
It is.
I guess the question is, when you say restart, they're virtual. We're having virtual learning sessions. And do you know what the status is for Washington and when they expect to start something for their students?
We don't. However, I'll need to get a more recent update from them. I kind of skipped over it during the presentation. Half of, or a little more than half of all of our districts in the state are contracted by commercial D&B commercial schools. That particular county has a contractor who handles nearly 40 districts across the state. So I'm not real sure exactly what might be the issue and why they haven't restarted the classroom phase, but my understanding is the driving phase has restarted. So I would assume that the classroom phase, and it could be that they just didn't answer the survey. I'm not sure at this moment, but we will check on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Are there other comments, questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Logan. We appreciate it. And we're ready to move on. All right, at this time, I believe we're ready to hear from Dr. Cumberland.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Quigley, for the opportunity to speak to you today, and good morning, Charter School Advisory Board members. My name is Tom Tomberlin. I'm the Director of Educator Recruitment and Support at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. See if Ashley's ready for me to start.
Is it showing up on your screen, Tom? Can you see it?
It is showing up on my screen, but it's in kind of the preview where
Okay, good.
it highlights the next slide.
Let me see. Here we go. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
So if we can go back to the first one real quick, the previous slide. Great. So in January 2021, a group named SREB, that's the Southern Region Education Board, presented to the State Board of Education on some initiatives they were doing with some of the states in the southeast. And that was to create what they called human capital roundtables to address some of the issues related to teacher recruitment, preparation, licensing, and employment. And so that group convened a group of North Carolina stakeholders to begin looking at ways that we could support better processes for our teachers entering the profession. That roundtable, next slide please. Here you see the makeup of that roundtable. This was an informal kind of think tank, if you will, of people from various agencies or stakeholder groups across the state coming together to think about how we could address these issues. The focus of this, there are many parts to a human capital system, but the focus of this became licensure, since by improving our licensure processes or the way we license teachers, that would have an impact on the other areas that we were trying to So the roundtable came up with a goal, and that goal was very simple: keep great teachers in the classroom and attract highly qualified, diverse candidates into the profession. The roundtable indicated that the need for this kind of reform had four major pillars, and that was to re-envision our pathways into teaching. And actually, I think there might be some animation on this slide. I apologize. There we go. Re-envision the pathways into teaching, redesign teacher licensure, reinforce teacher support, and revise the teacher salary schedules. So whenever one engages in reform, it's important to know what the current state of the system is in order to achieve those improvements. And so, and Ashley, I really apologize. There's apparently you have the animated version, which is really, it's difficult to keep up, to keep it synced. But I'll continue on. So the current licensure policy, the issues that we have here is we have a very narrow entrance into the licensure process. Generally, you have to have a bachelor's degree, and you have to, with a certain number of content hours required for that, and or you meet the requirements to be admitted into an EPP, what we call a traditional program. So that entryway into the initial license is fairly narrow, and it doesn't contemplate folks with with different experiences that may or may not have prepared them to become teachers. And then you have a system where teachers are put into kind of a 3-year holding pen, I guess is one way to put it, with a litany of requirements they have to meet in those 3 years. There's not a lot of structure to this. There's no clear exit ramps for folks who are not meeting those expectations to move out of the profession. And in the end, there's a very narrow pathway to continuing license. And currently, that's built from passing, that is predicated on passing the licensure exams and completing coursework. And so that's the only pathway out. The problem with this is, I'm sorry, the problem with this, if you could go back one, Ashley, I'm sorry. The problem with this exit or the conversion is that it does not do a very good job at distinguishing effective from ineffective teachers. And so we have evidence in the state that many teachers who pass the licensure exam go on to be fairly less effective in the classroom than we would like. And many teachers who are demonstrating high effectiveness with their students, those teachers in what I refer to as the holding pen, they're doing great things with their kids, but that their effectiveness is not considered in moving them through the licensure process. So the Human Capital Roundtable kind of re-envisioned this process and named it the North Carolina Pathways to Excellence for Teaching Professionals. What the proposal here is widen that entry point, allowing more people to enter the profession at the initial stages, have very clear and defined exit ramps out of this, so people that are unable to show effectiveness in teaching are not languishing for years, and they get very clear messages and perhaps exited from the profession. And then on the end, you have people coming out of this that are more likely to be effective teachers and do great things with their kids. And we believe that this adds a level of professionalism to the profession. It rewards excellence in advancement, and encourages retention for our teachers. So as part of that wider entry point, the Human Capital Roundtable thought of associate's degree or college completion as an initial pathway to entering the profession. We'll talk about that more in just a second. And then at the other side of this, squeeze on the teacher pipeline, fewer teachers entering our preparation programs than historically, and to simultaneously talk about exit ramps. But this is a necessary part of any human capital system. Candidates who cannot meet the requirements for entry into the profession should be given that feedback and should be offered ways to exit the profession gratefully. But we want to be very clear on this that we do not feel that licensure exams should be the sum total of whether one has met the effectiveness requirement to proceed throughout the system. So in these off ramps we're talking about, the candidate would have to show a lack of demonstrated content or pedagogy skill or competency, not just as identified through an examination, but it could be demonstrated through actual classroom practice in the presence of students. Teachers who show a lack of demonstrated effectiveness and time to complete the requirements. So what we're proposing here is not that the teacher be exited on failing to meet any one of these, but failing to meet all of the possible pathways for demonstrating that effectiveness. Next slide. So the Human Capital Roundtable proposes a tiered licensure system for North Carolina. And in this system, so we're getting away from that IPL, that there's just one IPL and you have 3 years with a litany of requirements to meet in order to convert to that continuing license. The Human Capital Roundtable is proposing that be tiered. A license 1 means that the candidate holds a bachelor's degree or has an industry certification and experience, and that person has not yet demonstrated any of the requirements of content, knowledge, or pedagogical skill. In that case, that person would choose one path or the other, either the content or the pedagogy, and work on that one requirement to move to a license level 2. So a license 2 would indicate that the person has demonstrated mastery of content or pedagogy by either passing the required licensure exam, completing statewide approved micro-credentials, and I'll talk about that in just a second, or completing some other approved process. These folks in the license 1, 2, or 3 stage would still be paired with an advanced teacher as a mentor, and would have increased salary over the license 1 candidate. These initial licenses 1, 2, and 3 would also come with a dedicated professional advancement account, a pot of money dedicated to the initial licensed candidate for professional learning opportunities, coursework, whatever that candidate needs to advance to the next level of licensure. And then finally, a license 3 candidate, we call this a teacher in residency skills advancement. They have demonstrated both mastery of content and pedagogy by completing one of those pathways. And they're still paired with a mentor teacher. Of course, this also comes with a commensurate increase in salary, and there's the professional learning account as well for these folks, because then the shift from a license 3 to a license 4, which is analogous to our conversion from an IPL to a CPL, comes when the teacher has demonstrated effective teaching for 3 or more years out of the 5 years. And this advancement also comes with an increase in salary, and the recommendation by the Human Capital Roundtable is this be a professional, competitive salary for as compared to other professions that require similar amount of education and credentialing. So above the license 4 are 2 advanced categories. These are the advanced teacher roles, classroom excellence, and advanced teacher adult leadership. If any of you are aware of the advanced teaching roles models that are going on in some of our districts across the state, this is a the impact of our most advanced teachers on more students and or other teachers to build and grow their capacity. So the Advanced Teacher Classroom Excellence, these are teachers who have demonstrated highly effective teaching with their students and have achieved great outcomes, growth or proficiency with their student populations. These advanced roles can be leveraged to create what many call a multi-classroom teacher. These advanced teachers who work with multiple classrooms to ensure, and the teachers of those multiple classrooms to ensure that students are getting high quality instruction on a day-to-day basis. There's also the advanced teacher adult leadership role. These are folks who have demonstrated that they are highly effective with students, and in addition, they have demonstrated skills in adult leadership. So these are folks who are making our teachers better. The focus is not as much on student instruction as much as helping adults in the initial phases of our licensure system move successfully through that process and demonstrate skill all along the way. So these are the tiers of the licensure system, and I want to go back to the very beginning. In advance of the license one, you have a learning permit or an apprentice teacher. So these would be teachers who come to us with maybe an associate's degree or have completed a number of years or credits towards a bachelor's, but have not yet completed that bachelor's degree. So this would offer a way to license these folks and begin them on the process of going through the licensure system. If you want to think of this as kind of encapsulating or encompassing our TA to Teachers program or the 2+2 programs between community colleges and our institutes of higher education, this is just kind of formalizing that and granting them the license. These teachers would not be eligible to be teachers of record. They would be working with a licensed 4 teacher and working on advancing through the system. So one of the most important, I'm sorry, if we go back there just for a second. One of the most important aspects of this is if you'll see in License 3, there's that little star with EPP on top. And this is to recognize that by and large in the state of North Carolina, and on average, teachers who complete a traditional educator preparation pathway on average are more effective than teachers who complete a different pathway. And that would be historically what was known as lateral entry and is now residency, and our teachers who come to us from out of state. Additionally, they're not only more effective, they also tend to stay in the profession longer than their counterparts who choose other pathways. So we wanted to build a process into this that recognized the value of an ed prep program and ensured that there was an incentive. There was still an incentive for candidates to go through a traditional program. And so as part of working with an EPP, a candidate could come out of the process, much like they can do now, having completed the requirements to demonstrate mastery of content and pedagogy. And by doing so, and that could be by passing a standardized test, that could be by engaging in these micro-credentials that we're exploring in the state, or some other approved process, those teachers could enter straight from an EPP program as a license 3 and command a higher salary than their counterparts who are entering at the license 1 or license 2 level. So looking at their apprentice model again really quickly, associate's degree or some kind of configuration of college credit, and they move, when they complete the bachelor's degree or some kind of industry certification, they can move into the license 1, and then 2 and 3 where they're completing those pedagogical and content requirements, and then finally moving on to license 4, which is the pathway there is demonstrated effectiveness with students. So the idea here is that as one advances through the licensure system, It is due to increasing positive impact on students and not just a compliance exercise, meeting some requirement that may or may not have any relationship with improved student outcomes. And then a little question here for the board and for you as well, was should we include an alternate requirement to those without an associate's degree? And that's where I reference perhaps some college credit hours, but if you haven't completed a bachelor's degree, there are lots of ways that this could be implemented. Next one. So the teacher in residency, this is just showing you the same model. These teachers, however, any teacher with a license 1 or higher would be eligible to be a teacher of record, much like our system now. So we have teachers that are coming out of our ed prep programs who have demonstrated have not passed any of the requirements for content pedagogy, and they're currently given 3 years in the process to meet those requirements. And so this model adheres to that ability of teachers to work in the classroom and be the teacher of record while they're demonstrating those competencies until they meet level 4 and convert to what we consider a continuing license. And then the question that we pose to the board and we pose to you as well, are there other new pathways to include? Are we capturing enough of the potential candidates out there in this model? And then in the traditional pathway, you can see here the ability of the teacher to enter at the license 3 level upon successful university preparation. And what we mean by that is having demonstrated the mastery of both content and pedagogy would allow those teachers to move into the space of a license 3. And then the requirement is to work in that license 3 level in conjunction with a mentor teacher and with professional development funds dedicated to that individual in order to meet the requirement to achieve effectiveness with his or her students and ultimately move on to the level of a license 4. So here's just kind of a chart for the goals that the Human Capital Roundtable had in terms of licensure and their proposed method of solving those problems and the rationale for doing so. So the goal was to provide agency for our teachers. We want them to have choices. I'm sure many of you are aware of the struggles that some of your teachers who are great teachers by any measure that we could think of, that are doing great things in the classroom, but have real difficulty in passing a standardized test. So can we offer them more ways to meet that requirement? The trick is not to create pathways that are alternate pathways that are easier or harder than the existing pathways, but have a commensurate level of rigor for the candidates. And also to allow for more meaningful alternatives that better correlate with effective teaching. The reality is that praxis exams do not correlate very well with effective teaching. We see that in North Carolina, and then there's national research that supports that as well. So if the goal ultimately is to get teachers in the classroom who will do great things with kids, then it doesn't make sense that we preference the proxy over the product. And that's what we do with these licensure exams. We ignore the fact that teachers are doing great things with their kids in the classroom in authentic job-embedded settings, and focus only on the passing of a standardized test. So again, the menu of options here, we would keep those assessments in place for those for whom it's working. Explore creating competency-based micro-credentials for content and pedagogical knowledge. If you haven't heard of the micro-credentialing work that's going on under the leadership of former Governor Bev Perdue, I would invite you to look into that. I think for this coming board meeting in April, there will be a presentation, some recommendations on micro-credentialing to the board. And then number 3 here is there's some language here that we updated for after the board meeting. It says skip to demonstrating effectiveness, but we would say something more like demonstrating effectiveness with students in lieu of assessments. So the rationale is that praxis tests are barriers to a diverse workforce and do not correlate with effective teaching. Not only is there a lack of correlation between praxis test scores and teacher effectiveness, but there's also evidence that the failure rates for our minority candidates on these praxis exams are much higher than their white counterparts. NTPA and PPAT, that's the pedagogical exams that we're talking about. They do have some correlation with improved student outcomes, as do the foundations of reading and math courses for our elementary education and exceptional children general curriculum licenses. So we do find some correlation there. So that's the Human Capital Roundtable was not in favor of eliminating all standardized tests as a pathway, but to support teachers with other alternatives to that requirement. So for the license 4 teachers, this would be would continue to be a continuing license, so it would have a 5-year renewal period. And what the Human Capital Roundtable is recommending is that 5-year renewal cycle not be based on continuing education credits, which are largely acquired through participation and not any real demonstration of improved skill or impact on students. So the recommendation of the Human Capital Roundtable is that 5-year renewal period be predicated on positive student outcomes, demonstrated mastery of content skills and instructional capabilities beyond that was initially granted for the license. And the recognition that multiple ways for the candidate to demonstrate that positive impact on students be available to teachers, that this is not it's very important to stress that the Human Capital Roundtable did not see EVOS, for example, as the only way to show impact on student learning. And so the challenge is to create authentic, multiple measures of teacher effectiveness that teachers can demonstrate in order to renew that license. And then the other thing that the Human Capital Roundtable recognized is the career pathways for teachers is very flat in the state of North Carolina. So one gets a continuing professional license, and that's pretty much it, unless the teacher wants to avail him or herself of other opportunities such as administration or district level leadership. And so what the Human Capital Roundtable proposed was creating additional pathways, additional leadership opportunities that kept teachers in the classroom. And so these are the Master Teacher Classroom Excellence and Master Teacher Adult Leadership roles. They serve students at an increased capacity for the Classroom Excellence, or they function as cooperating teachers, mentor early career teachers, department heads, some real authentic leadership opportunities that keep these teachers connected to the classroom and don't only offer advancement if one elects to leave the classroom. So one of the important things about this license for advanced credentials is these licenses do not come themselves with an increase in salary over the license for teachers. But the way the Human Capital Roundtable envisioned this is a teacher must hold that advanced credential in order to hold one of these advanced teaching role positions. And so the license qualifies the teacher for a position. Any increase in salary would come for a teacher holding one of those advanced positions. So in license 1 through 4, you see an advancement in salary based on increased effectiveness with students. In this particular, or each level of the license comes with an increase in salary. But at the level 4 advanced, the license 4 advanced, the salary differential only comes when the teacher is employed in one of those advanced teaching roles. And this is just going back to that original graphic, showing the advancement process. And certainly, if you see in license 1 through 3, there is flexibility in this. In other words, a teacher could come in as a license 1 and decide, I'm going to go and try to meet both requirements, and one could jump from a license 1 to a license 3 if you met both the content and the pedagogy requirements. And so then finally, the Human Capital Roundtable believes that this type of model restores the respect that the teaching profession deserves. It should help us build a more diverse, quality teaching force and increase our instructional capabilities. It encourages more young professionals, career switchers, and out-of-state teachers to enter the North Carolina teaching force. It invests in our teachers, students, and North Carolina's economy. And we will be the first in the nation to innovate in this particular way by expanding the notion of effectiveness and how one becomes licensed. I also need to be very clear about the Human Capital Roundtable. This is a conceptual framework. There are a lot of questions of exactly how one would implement this. There are lots of underlying interworking pieces that need to be worked out in order for this to be a successful model. And the Human Capital Roundtable did not take it on themselves to create an entire operational model. This is, they made their case for how licensure could be improved in North Carolina, and as a result of that case, the State Board of Education has referred this conceptual model to PEPC, the Professional Educators Preparations and Standards Commission, for actually building out a functioning model that could work in the state of North Carolina. As you know, there are also statutes involved with our licensure process, and so any recommendations that come out of PEPC are likely to require statutory changes in order to be implemented. So we are working closely with our legislative liaisons and the General Assembly to ensure that they understand this system and what we're proposing and what kinds of legislative changes would be needed in order to make it practicable. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that you folks may have.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Conklin. I have a few questions. I'll kick it off.
Sure.
What is the timeline in terms of this? And I guess I may not be understanding all the components of this, but this seems like this is somewhat of a integrating what's been done with the EPPs and building upon that. Is that a correct characterization?
Integrating what's been done with the EPPs. You mean in terms of their accountability model? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the way people can get licensed through alternate pathways and things like that.
Well, I mean, we're not proposing elimination of any of the alternative pathways, and in fact, we're kind of promoting them. I think what's really at issue here is offering other ways to demonstrate effectiveness, and making effectiveness the primary driver of movement through the licensure system. As I stated earlier, our current system is built solely on passing a standardized exam in order for a teacher to move forward. And in my position, I get lots of calls from schools, from legislators, and from candidates that they, on any metric we have, they are doing very well with their students, but we can't license them because they haven't passed the test.
Okay, so that kind of gets to my next point, which, yeah, we've heard from the state board, charter schools are meant to be laboratories of innovation, and I've always felt that if a school has an observation system and they, check off the teacher's effectiveness, and then that's coupled with actual student data, whether that be EOG data or MClass data or some third-party assessment, not the teacher's assessments themselves, whether mapped already. If those criteria are in line with a rigorous threshold, top 50% of the state, why can't we just license the teacher? And, why couldn't we just give charters the flexibility to do that if, we're meant to be flexible and autonomous? And I think one of the biggest ways that charters are, restricted into a kind of a complicated system that frankly is not structured in a way that smaller organizations can easily navigate, why couldn't we petition for just, petition to just say, these are the criteria. If I can think of people that fit this example, have teaching experience, have demonstrated metrics of student performance, and are in my top teachers from my observation, but are still having licensure issues for half a dozen, what goes down to paperwork and procedure. And so why not kind of liberate charter schools and then, stack the data up 5 years from now and see who's moving students more. I know you don't have sole power to do that, but I just like to put that out there.
Sure. A couple of things in that. We talked a lot with the Human Capital and the Human Capital Roundtable about evaluation as potentially one of these measures. And the reality of the situation is that the data suggests that our evaluation processes are not rigorous enough and and there is great variability in how they're implemented across from one LEA to another. So the challenge here is that licensure is a statewide process. And we certainly don't, as the state, we don't kind of micromanage the different schools and charter schools and districts on the relative rigor of their evaluation processes. But the data are clear on this one that there's just not equivalency across from LEA to LEA and from charter to charter. And so because a license is portable across all LEAs, there is interest in maintaining a statewide level of threshold of what it means to have a license. So, and then your other questions, yeah. So charter schools are not unlike many LEAs in that. So let's even say we looked at all the objective measures we have, proficiency and even growth as a means for licensing folks. We just don't have the statutory authority to do that at this time. So we see it play out all the time. It's happening all the time, but we don't have the authority to consider that under current statute. And I see some chat questions.
I'm gonna let some other people jump in here.
So I'm seeing a question from Ashley Bailey, the RTOYs. Is that Regional Teachers of the Year, I think, is what I'm assuming RTOYs are very interested in this process and been pleased to be included in the discussion. We have many questions moving forward. We're glad this innovative discussion and planning is happening. I absolutely agree that there are many ways to demonstrate effectiveness. How do we measure effectiveness without relying on EVOS? This seems very subjective. I'm also concerned about using EVOS data for the next 5 years, at least as we try to overcome the loss of learning due to the pandemic. It's a great question. All I see is Sherry. I don't need to be overly familiar, but this is a great question, Sherry. This is exactly one of the questions we're putting to the teams on Pepsi for how do you measure effectiveness? What are other ways to measure effectiveness? As many of you know, I manage the EVOS system for the state. I like EVOS. I think it's a great tool, but I do not believe that it can be the sole measure of effectiveness in this process. We need to find other ways to account for teacher effectiveness. And the trick is to do it in a way that's not subjective. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying that this is going to be a real challenge for folks to come up with and to develop some kind of measure. I will say, if we go back to principal evaluation, we find that principal evaluation, as I said before, is highly variable from one district to another or from one charter school to another. But there are other ways to measure the impact of teachers. And one of those that has been demonstrated in the past that is very effective is student surveys. Students are remarkably good at identifying high-quality teachers and very effective teachers. And we do find that in the state, at least in years past, when we piloted these measures, student surveys correlate highly with EVOS outcomes. So I know the prevailing conventional wisdom is that you can't let students opine on an adult, but it doesn't seem that the data bear that out, that students are remarkably good at distinguishing among teachers. And, I'm not saying that would be a required element to this, but you could include that as one of the possible ways to demonstrate that effectiveness. And then your question about, I'm concerned about using EVOS data for the next 5 years at least as we try to overcome the learning loss due to the pandemic. So I'm not entirely sure that that's as problematic as you might think it is. I know we think that all of our ability to measure things is kind of upended by the pandemic. But if EVOS is, we're working very closely with EVOS and other states to understand how well we can do measuring student growth on a gap year analysis. And so, so what we find there is even when you have a missing year between let's say 18-19 and 20-21, and you're missing 19-20 data, the measurement of growth of students is very consistent to what we would see if we had that missing year. And the way we've done this is to look at if we went from 2015-16 to 2017-18 and ignored 16-17, how well could we measure growth, and how strongly would it correlate to what we saw when we had all those years in effect? And the outcomes are very, very strongly correlated in the 90%. So I don't think EVOS is going to, as far as using that as a tool to understand effectiveness of our teachers, is going to suffer in quite the same way that we're going to see with the accountability measures, the proficiency measures. Certainly those are going to dip. But the ability of students to grow and learn, even when when that learning may be mitigated or diminished by something like COVID-19, we'll still be able to look and see which students are able to grow during that time and to measure that growth. So I'm not sure that 5 years is going to take us to kind of get the ship righted on EVOS. I would put that at much shorter. It is already so subjective. Schools and teachers are being measured on the performance of only a handful of teachers. What about everyone else? I agree that our data is going to need to be looked at through a different lens for the foreseeable future. I agree. Your school accountability growth is a handful, as you put it, of teachers in your school that are determining the success or the failure in terms of the school report card and the accountability model. We would hope that by changing the way we think of effectiveness in the licensure system, that would in turn extend out to things like our accountability systems for measuring growth. When I look at EBOS, I'm able to see dips certain years. We seek to understand the causes. I would think we would do the same during the pandemic years. Yes, I'm not trying to suggest that certain schools won't see some dips in their effectiveness relative to their peers in the pandemic year. That's certainly going to happen. But I think what I'm saying is we'll be able to capture that dip in growth, and we'll also be able to look at other people who went through the pandemic, and are there certain elements of a school or certain characteristics of a school or of teachers or of students that we can really dig into and see that was kind of that offered some protection against the dip in growth. And this is not about judging or being punitive to these schools. It's just helping us understand which of our schools and which of our student populations were most adversely affected by this pandemic, and EVOS can really help us parse that out. In License 4, you refer to master teachers. Is there any plans to emphasize teachers earning advanced degrees, such as a master's or a PhD? So the thing about this model that's being proposed by the Human Capital Roundtable is it is focused on student outcomes, improved student outcomes, as the vehicle that drives all of this. So if a teacher got a master's degree and became much more effective with their teachers, our system should recognize that and allow for increased compensation opportunities. However, what about the teacher who elects not to get a master's degree and elects to do some other kind of training that makes him or her a better teacher and improves outcomes for kids? Should they not be afforded the opportunity to advance? So what the Human Capital Roundtable remains largely agnostic to the pathway one pursues to increase one's effectiveness with students, and preferences those outcomes over the input, either a master's degree or some kind of training. So we're preferencing the outcome for students over the process by which the teacher arrived at that. All right.
Dr. Tom?
Yes.
This is Rita Ham. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
First, thank you for this great presentation and this volume of information. And I commend the task force on the graphics and the visuals, because I couldn't imagine trying to digest this without the visuals that you've provided. It's really great. As someone who got a teaching license in the 80s and worked my way through a superintendent's license in 2008, I certainly have gone through this systems process and really welcome the view that you're taking and the new vision for widening the path and providing greater support for teacher effectiveness. I am excited about all of this. I wonder about a couple of different things. You talked about the praxis and failure rates of praxis, and I wondered if the force discussed any on the front end, front loading and preparation for taking that test, rather than saying that test is not a good measure, when in fact it measures what we're looking for, which is that content knowledge and pedagogical skills and those things. So could we not do some greater preparation to take the test? And also, did the force discuss principal preparation, other than, again, saying evaluations are so subjective? I've found as a principal that observing the classroom is amazingly informative, as to how a teacher is doing and how effective that teacher is. And so maybe statewide, kind of a better standardization of how principals do evaluate their teachers. Was any of that part of the conversation, those two items?
So let's go back to the first one, the preparation. So I think our APPs, and I would include both the traditional pathway and the residency pathway, work very hard to prepare their teachers for those big requirements. Content, licensure exam, and the pedagogical exam. But the issue that we face is that the legislature has allowed teachers to defer passing those tests until the end of the third year of the initial license. And so this has become a major sticking point in the state, because teacher candidates, and many of our teacher candidates understand that they have those 3 years, and so they'll avoid those requirements while they're in the Ed Prep program and under the guidance of an Ed Prep program, and decide to just put it off until later after they enter the teaching profession. And so what we're trying to do here is a way not to take away that ability to delay that demonstration of skill, but to incentivize that behavior as best we can. So that's the idea of a teacher being able to come in at a license 3. So we're incentivizing using those resources that one has when you're in an EPP or affiliated with an EPP, to meet those requirements as quickly as possible, so that you can achieve a higher salary and be that much further down the road in the system. But we also wanted to leave time and space for people who didn't want to choose that option. And so that's where those professional advancement accounts come in, that money that's dedicated to those initially licensed teachers, or those licensed 1 through 3 teachers, that they have the resources to engage in high quality professional learning opportunities that are going to help them meet those requirements. One of the things we'd like to do as the state, by tying the funds to the individual, we can then track those opportunities, those things that they spend those funds on, and start developing kind of a consumer reports for folks of what professional learning activities are impactful, what help teachers move through the process efficiently, and what are those that don't seem to have much impact at all and may be a waste of a teacher's time. So we really want to provide lots of resources to folks to work really smart, not harder, but smarter in meeting these requirements. And then the principal evaluation, I think it would be wonderful. It's such an involved process in the state, evaluating teachers, that it's really a shame that it's not yielding the kind of data that will allow us to use this in a licensing system. So I'm certainly supportive of working towards meeting that goal, and so that it should be the case where a teacher's evaluation is part of this one of these ways that one demonstrates effectiveness. And so we're committed to making that happen. I don't know if that means things like, should principals be involved in some kind of evaluation calibration exercise at the state. So putting examples of high quality instruction and, quite frankly, low quality instruction in front of principals, and seeing if they can distinguish between the two. That would all be great work moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it would be. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, other questions for Dr. Tomberlin? I just want to try to keep us moving here. Yeah, still got a lot to do.
I do have one more thing that is pressing my mind, and that's the exit ramp concept. I so agree that that's needed, but again, it seems like that would be heavily dependent on principals' input. Were there discussion, I know there were discussions about criteria, if a teacher doesn't decide to take this off ramp, how are they encouraged to when it becomes evident that they need to?
So that goes to the question of licensure versus employment. So those two things, we've worked very hard in the state to separate those two things. Licensure is under the purview of the State Board of Education. Employment's under the purview of local boards of education and charter schools. So we want to recognize those two distinctions. Of course, if a teacher fails to meet the requirements of a license, that can result in the license being revoked. Especially in the case of charter schools, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that that severs employment. It does in an LEA in most cases, but not in a charter school. So we would like to keep that distinction alive, and so charter schools, if a teacher fails to meet the requirements of the license and is exited from the system, and I want to be very clear, we always want to provide a pathway back. I don't see any of these as terminal. Then that could happen separate and apart from your decision of whether to maintain employment with that individual. Conversely, if you decide that a teacher is not the right fit for your school, that should be an employment decision and should not have any impact on the teacher's ability to gain a license. And so in this model, we would keep those two systems of licensing and employment separate as much as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Quigley. Chairman, I really enjoyed this, and anybody can feel free to email me with any other questions they might have.
We appreciate you coming, Dr. Tomlin, and appreciate your time. We're going to shift slightly to accommodate, to stay on time with Dr. Howard's and Dr. Edmonds' schedule. And just, so I'm going to hand it over to them at this time. We'll pick up the amendments in a little bit.
Thank you and good morning, Chairman Quigley and all of the members of the Charter School Advisory Board. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm Tammy Howard. I'm Director of Accountability Services. And this is the presentation that was given to the State Board of Education last week. It has two components. One is the U.S. Department of Education available waivers and flexibility for this school year, and also looking at the data from the fall end of course administrations and the beginning of grade 3 reading test administrations. To begin with, we're going to look at the U.S. Department of Education flexibility and waiver potential. So this, of course, was released to states on the afternoon, early evening of February 22nd. And in that memo, the department noted the difficulty of the pandemic on schools and families, and they were committed to supporting states in assessing learning of all students. So it's important in looking at this to delineate, if you will, what is available to be waived and what is being given more flexibility. So the waiver is with respect to school identification, and that includes progress toward long-term goals and the annual meaningful differentiation, which is our comprehensive support improvement schools, our targeted support and improvement schools. And the last bullet on this slide is very important, and this is one that we heard much communication and input from across the field in the past several months, and that is the participation requirement of testing at least 95% of all students and subgroups of students. You may be familiar with not meeting that 95% participation actually had a negative outcome, particularly for the accountability model. But of course, there will not be from the federal government the requirement for an accountability, which in North Carolina is the school performance grades for this school year And specific in this waiver availability is the waiving of that 95% participation requirement. Now, that does not mean, and we'll talk more about this over the next several slides, that assessments have been waived as they were in spring 2020 because they have not been waived. So it's also important to remember that since we will not be identifying any new comprehensive support improvement schools or targeted support improvement schools, that the schools that have already been identified as those will continue with that identification so they can also receive support. The next targeted time for new identifications will be fall of 2022, and that would be based on data from the 2021-22 school year. So in federal law, it very clearly states that whenever a waiver to the Every Student Succeeds Act plan for a state is given, that it must be ensured that parents and the public have transparency to the result of the students for each state. So to address this in the waiver from accountability and school identification, it is very clearly stated that states must publicly report the percentage of students not assessed, disaggregated by subgroup. And again, a reminder that testing as a requirement has not been waived in the U.S. Department of Education has not opened the door for there to be a waiver for assessing students. But this requirement is very clearly stated that we will report the percentage of students not assessed and we'll disaggregate that by subgroup. The U.S. Department of Education did encourage states to address other high stakes testing requirements. So even though the U.S. Department of Education is saying testing has not been waived, they're acknowledging through the waiver availability for accountability and school identification that how we use the data from the 2020-21 school year is to be given much thought and consideration. So with that in mind, again, stressing that it's important that parents, educators, and the public have access to data on student learning and success. The state is required to maintain all state and local report card requirements, including disaggregating all data by student subgroups. So we refer to this in North Carolina as the NC report card, and you well know that all public school units get one as well. So as a condition of the waiver, states must publicly report chronic absenteeism, which we already collect and provide to the federal government, and also student and education access to technology. This one is as the data is available, meaning as the state has access to this information. So we of course are in the work of this is actually done outside of accountability services by some of our colleagues in the department, and they of course will on providing that information. So really is accountability. Let's look at assessments. So the department did not give a waiver from assessment. It did say in its letter that certainly they would never suggest putting a student in an unsafe situation for the sole purpose of taking an assessment. So they did offer some flexibilities for states to consider as we all try to administer as many assessments as we possibly can, with the end goal of having data from this school year, for the 2020-21 school year, both individually for students and for schools, for future planning on instructional needs. The first two flexibilities are ones that North Carolina has already talked about over the past several months. The first one is a shorter version of the test. Many of you will remember a couple of years ago, we did shorten our assessments, and they are really as short as they possibly can be, particularly in order to maintain validity and reliability. So the potential for shortening our tests just simply does not exist. The remote administration, again, we had many conversations about that as well. That was considered not doable given particularly around test security and the validity of the results. And because remote administration means the potential to administer the assessments in the home. And some of the feedback that we had from some assessments that were not accountability assessments, but were other required assessments, was that the data did look like, and some of this was qualitative, that there was some reason to question whether or not the data was the student's individual work. What we have been able to do, we've spent a great deal of time talking about and identifying ways to make this happen, is extending the testing window for the end of grade and the end of course test. And in the memo, the U.S. Department of Education specifically encouraged states to extend the window for the English language proficiency test. So in North Carolina, how we did this was we expanded opportunities for test administrations and a process that we already had in existence, and that's testing outside the window process. We also are allowing testing to occur until July 5th, 2021. And we have already expanded the English language proficiency testing window by 3 weeks. Now, we may continue to discuss the English language proficiency test opportunities potentially for summer 2021 and fall 2021. So the next steps in this process is a little bit different from North Carolina and some other states. It's not as a clear path as we had in spring 2020, where all the states were at the same place as a starting point, if you will. There is a USCD waiver template for the accountability pieces and the school identification. That template is not available yet. I think the U.S. Department of Education was trying to get this information out to states as quickly as possible. So they're still trying to work through, particularly this template that will be provided. And also, there are several states like North Carolina that had already submitted a waiver request. North Carolina's was submitted on January 21st, and it lines up very well with what the U.S. Department of Education is offering states, with one exception, and that is that North Carolina asked to only have to report the data. Again, going back to that transparency and availability of information for parents and the public, we asked only to have to do that at the state level, to not do that at the school level. And of course, the communication from the U.S. Department of Education is the NC report card and other reporting has to be at the school level. But nevertheless, that puts us in a situation in North Carolina where the U.S. Department of Education, we're anticipating, and last week we were told most likely this week that we would have a conversation with our colleagues at the department or where exactly North Carolina is. And the best outcome, and not one that I can for sure say will happen, but the best outcome would be if they act on the waiver that we have already submitted, approving it with the qualification of course, we have to report at the school level, and they waive the requirement for an additional 30-day public comment. That would be the best outcome. If not, then we possibly would have to submit the waiver template, and we possibly would have to go back to public comment. And the impact of that is just quite simply that just delays getting the federal waiver from accountability and school identification finalized, so we can then turn our attention to the requirements for accountability that are in North Carolina state law. And we all know, of course, that the school performance grade accountability model is in state statute. And so just as with spring 2020, we would need to go to the next step of addressing the state requirements. So with that, we're going to stop talking about the waiver and look at the data from the fall 2020 testing. And as we know, in this school year, students are receiving instruction either at school or remotely with variations of this model across the state. And to ensure the safety and health of the students and teachers, the testing windows were expanded, but we also know that that did not enable as many students to test as we typically have in the fall. So one thing we really want to stress when looking at the BOG3 is that the BOG3 has two purposes, and that's the beginning of grade 3 reading test. It is intended to give teachers and parents and principals an understanding of where a student is on grade 3 reading standard. And that test is administered at the beginning of the year, but we all know that it is an end-of-year test. It's just being administered at the beginning of the year. So once we get to the BOG3 data, just to know that we would not expect a lot of students to be showing high proficiency on the beginning of grade 3 tests, because even though it's given at the beginning of the year, it's actually assuming you've had a year of instruction on grade 3 standards. The other purpose of that test is in the growth model, as we're all very familiar with. So in all of the data, whether we're looking at VOG3, whether we're looking at the end of course, we have to consider the variability of the testing windows. Typically, we have very contained testing windows, but of course, with this year, as we've already said, we have relaxed that in order to support testing in a safe environment. We also have to think about the variability in the test participants, especially when compared to previous years, as we know that the comparison of the population may not specifically align as we would have in previous years. Variability in the instructional mode, this is the context conversation that we all need to be mindful of. The things have shifted a great deal from what they were for many years in our schools. And the last bullet is one that we really want to stress, and that's the variability inside. So as we look at some of this information, you'll see the subgroups. Some subgroups have a much smaller population than other subgroups. But of course, we all know the more numbers you have, the more confidence we can all have in what those numbers mean. But when we're looking at a subgroup whose population is around 2,000 students, and particularly you'll see this for the end of course assessments, and thinking about that really comprises 4 different tasks, then you can see how small that n size gets very fast. And so we don't give the same understanding or confidence in that information that we do in numbers where we have populations that have a high number, into the tens of thousands students participating in the assessment. So all that to say, before we get to the next slide, which is looking at the fall in the test data, just to remind ourselves that typically we do not, in accountability, ever report any fall test data. The test data for a school year is considered an entire school year, and we have never in the past, we do not have a precedent for looking at the fall data. We gathered this data and presented it to the state board with the intent of sharing, here's where we are. Locals have access to their information. Sometimes when their locals are looking at their data, they kind of want to know what the state is doing to kind of see how they compare. So this is very contextual data. This data is intended to kind of give a perspective and realize, of course, that it would be very difficult to draw some very significant or very firm conclusions based on this data. And of course, all of our colleagues across the state at the public school unit, they know the context of their data. And so I think they really have more of the full picture than I do or have. So on this first slide that you see here, draw your attention to the state total. This is for the end of course test, of which there are 4, NC Math 1, NC Math 3, English 2, and Biology. As of February 9th, and just know that test administrations have continued since February 9th, but as of February 9th, we know the expected number of tests we expected to be administered, and that was the number of students who are enrolled in these courses was at 175,559. 86.3 of those tests have been administered. And that really is much higher than we thought would be. I'm not sure if you would agree with that or not, but there was one local public school unit that tested greater than 95% of their students. But I think we're back to the local context and what's possible within the confines of those situations. But here you can see we've broken this down by the state board region. All of the information that we share today is by state board region and statewide overall. But then we also look at this with respect to the student subgroups, because we do want to kind of address the question, so is everybody having access to the assessment at the same rate, at the same availability, or are we seeing some disconnect? Again, we would suggest that public school units take this information, look at their data, and draw their conclusions and see where they fall in this. But you can see the range here from a high of 91 91.8 and 91.7, and then the low of 77.3. So, and you can also see on this slide the small population for American Indian, which is 1,701. So you can see the difference there, and which has an impact on how we can interpret this information. On the next slide, this shows all 4 end-of-course tests, and particularly what struck us was the not proficient level and level 5. And of course, you see an inverse impact here where the not proficient increased for 3 of the 4 end-of-course tests, and the level 5 decreased. And that is notable because we're seeing that at both ends of the performance spectrum. So I think that is something that needs attention as well. English 2, as you can see, did not. It actually, the not proficient actually went down. And while the level 5 went down a little bit, it did not go down as much as it did for the other courses. So that's an important conversation to have in thinking about what is the difference with English 2. You know, obviously it is a test and a course that is looking at reading comprehension. So you're not necessarily going to be introduced to new skills per se, as much as one would for biology, English, NC Math 1 or NC Math 3. So the next several slides go through each one of these assessments, and I won't walk through each one of these. I think all of you would be able to do that and see. But you see a pretty consistent pattern with all of these end-of-course tests. And again, just to remember, we never just focus on the fall. At the end of the year, we'll have the entire year, and these numbers could shift, okay? So it'll be interesting. Out of this year and the different situation that we're in, that's one thing that will be interesting is to see if these numbers go up or if they go down once we do have the entire year. Shifting to the beginning of grade 3, again, we began with the percent of tests that have been completed, considered the expected number of tests, and that would be the total number of students that are in grade 3. This is lower than it, of course, but we're not really too concerned about this. We understand, of course, that 67.7 is actually, again, higher than we had thought. It kind of creeped up over time. This test is going to have its window closed. The only one that really will, that's a state EOG or EOC assessment, and it's closing March 12th. And the reason is because we do not want this test to be too close to the end of year test administration. So we're still having some, excuse me, we're still having some test administrations occur with this. So I think this would be a little bit higher, but I don't think this will go much higher than that 67.7%. And then again, looking at subgroups on the next slide, you again see the same pattern pretty much with the participation, again cautioning about those small numbers. And on the slide that looks really at the level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, an additional caution here when considering this with respect to the EOCs, just to remember that this is an end of grade test. And even though you do see some differences here, we're not surprised by these differences, given it is a smaller population, even at the 67.7. That's pretty robust, but nevertheless, that's not the greater than 95% that we would typically have. And knowing that this is grade level content standards, then I think this particularly is for information, for discussion, and really seeing kind of where we are, but not overly indicative of one thing or another. And then the next slide, of course, looks at the subgroup information as well. So that concludes all the slides that I have. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, and just to say also thank you for this opportunity to share this information.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. I saw some questions come up in the chat. I want to just say thank you for coming to present today. One of the questions, I'll open it up to the group, and I'll start with Cheryl Turner's question. Do you want to go ahead and share?
Thanks, Alex.
Dr. Howard, the longer testing window, does that mean if the testing can go to July, does that mean even though we test some kids in May, that students who come to summer school who may not have been tested in May can be tested up till July?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Because, we get some of those parent phone calls and they call us and they don't feel comfortable sending their student to school to take the test. And that may very well be what happens at your school in May. But that situation could change by the middle of June. And so then if they're able to come and you're able to arrange it, then absolutely you can do that up until July 5th. Now there is paperwork that occurs with the regional accountability coordinator, but your testing coordinators are well aware of that and know how to complete that.
Okay, other questions? I have a question.
This is a question.
Go ahead, Sherry. No, go ahead.
Dr. Howard, this is you, Reeves. I have a question that's converse to Ms. Turner's question. With the testing outside the window, how far in advance would we be allowed to begin testing and hopes to get them all tested before our last day of school?
That's an excellent question as well. And the date is in April. That is when the end of grade test will be available. The end of course test, of course, technically they're already in the system and available. You just need that permission, which is a matter of completing the paperwork to get that testing outside the window. But the end of grade is mid-April, and we did post that on our Testing News Network, and I will look while we're talking. I think it's April 14th. But again, your testing coordinators will know that, and I'll try to double check while we're talking here. And if we end before I find it, I'll put it in the chat. And I'm pretty sure it's April 14th that it will be open.
Okay, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Dr. Howard, so my understanding is that the data is going to be reported out at the school level, so that similar to previous years, there'll be the big spreadsheet with all of the data, the growth scores, the school performance grade.
Well, and not necessarily the school performance grade. So from a federal requirement, we are not required to calculate the school performance grade. If the General Assembly follows suit and gives a waiver from the state requirement for calculating the school performance grade, we would not anticipate doing that. We would anticipate focusing on the requirements that are in the NC report card around at each grade level, the students at each of the academic achievement levels, and the participation. We're still required to report that participation. And of course, we'll be reporting the non-participating student, the percent of non-participating students, and broken down by demographics. So assuming that the General Assembly waives accountability, we would not calculate school performance grade.
What about, what is your kind of, I don't have a crystal ball, but would you anticipate the growth data being reported? And I guess my follow-up to that is just, how can we know, how can we have confidence in the growth measure given, or what are the kind of behind the scenes steps being taken to kind of evaluate and develop, or is it just we're going to predict the same, that the student would have the same predicted school year score as if they had gone through 2 full years of school, and then it's just where they stand against that predicted element, or is there like a COVID reduction in what that predicted scale score is?
Right. So I know Dr. Chamberlain was on before me, and he's included in these conversations very much so. We have some conversations coming up scheduled around that. We've been talking with SAS, who of course is the vendor for EVOS, for quite a few months now. And as we've gotten available data, we have shared it with staff so they can just look at some analysis. I'm sure you're very familiar that in the analysis for EBOS, it is always determined first that the data can support the growth analysis. So the question is really twofold, and keep in mind we're still having these conversations. But at this point, one question is whether or not the data will support any growth analysis. And we won't know that till
it's an issue of scale.
Right, exactly, whether it will support it. And if it doesn't, then that's the end of that conversation. Because using test scores to make growth judgments, if you will, or determinations is a much better word, determinations, then it is just like with assessment. With reliability and validity, we have to affirm that we have certain reliability of the test scores before we can actually report them and use them in any meaningful way. So it's the same thing with EBOS. And so the first step is whether or not, given the wide testing windows that we have, which we really didn't have a choice of whether or not to do that, but given the wide testing windows, given the circumstances of this school year, the first step would be whether or not the data will actually support that type of analysis. The second question then becomes, and we won't know that till the summer, the second question then becomes, so if you can do it, then how does one use it? How does, I'm sure you're all familiar with, of course, the teacher and principal bonus and the principal pay. So I think those are bigger, more detailed, more involved conversations with more individuals within the department and other stakeholders and other leaders in education to think more thoroughly through that conversation. But the first step is to have the data and then to see if the data supports that. And then if it does, then what would that look like? But it would not be used assuming a state waiver of the school performance grades. It would not be a part of a school performance grade system. It would be a standalone reporting, if you will.
Right. I guess, given normally this process takes into August, October, September October before things are reported, I mean, should we anticipate, we'll have an internal ready review somewhere in the summer, but the actual, just because there's some, unpacking that data and as you said, assessing its validity and reliability, is that going to take a lot longer?
Well, and we're having those conversations as well. I think the internal ready system for the test scores themselves will probably be on the same trajectory as we're typically used to. Whether or not staff needs additional time, and they very well may, then that could impact the flow of that information. Absolutely good.
All right, other questions? Sounds like we'll know a lot more over the next 3 months.
I think so, and part of this will depend upon the participation as we go across, the spring and we get to July 5th. The number of students that participate, that's going to be a factor in some of this as well. So, and I cannot find my note about that date, but I will find it and post that in the chat. So I'll hang on just for a couple minutes while I try to find that date.
And you may have clarified this. Will there be retesting?
So retesting, we of course refer to that as summer program. And we have shared that summer program will be allowed or will proceed as a local decision. The summer program, of course, was based on giving another opportunity for more instruction and then another test administration. So from our viewpoint, we feel as though that's more of a local decision. Again, with public school units knowing their situations, knowing the usability of that data and the opportunities for those students and what is best for those students, we felt as if that was a better conversation to have locally. Now, the process for, of course, having board approval, et cetera, locally, and then submitting that to your regional accountability coordinator, that still exists. But that will be available.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. If anyone else wants to jump in, if not, just want to say thank you. We know that this is certainly been a tumultuous team for your year for your team as well as all of ours, and just appreciate your detailed work and steady leadership. Thank you.
Well, absolutely, you're welcome, and thank you. And I always try to say thank you for the collaboration because so many of you help us, and we could not do it without you. So just continue to contact us and ask questions. If you have a question, I'm sure someone else does as well, and so it helps us all in the end.
Thank you, Dr. Hart.
Thank you.
All right, I recognize we're behind time, Ashley, but I think people might need a quick break, so why don't we just start at 11:30, take a 10-minute break, and I think, we'll see how we progress from there. I told you 12:15 was ambitious, so.
All right, sounds good. 10-minute break.
And granola bar. Get ready. All right, 11:30, we're ready to get back started. Hopefully everybody was able to take a quick minute, and we're ready to go with our amendments, I believe.
All right, thank you, Chair Quigley. This is Ashley Becerra with the Office of Charter Schools, and we have 2 amendment requests today. So the first one is from Telra Institute, and you will recall that they were present at the February meeting, and they have requested an enrollment increase of 30 students for year 1, which will be next year, as they will begin their opening year next year. During that meeting, the discussion came up regarding whether enrollment increases have been approved during, before the school has opened. And so our office did some research, and we found 2 instances of that in the last couple of years. The first is Alamance Community School. Their amendment was recommended by you and then approved by the state board in May 2020. And they requested an additional 60 students from 400 to 460 because they had a larger capacity building than they originally intended. However, that was approved. However, the actual enrollment was 338 for year 1, so it was actually below their original projection of 400 students. The second case that we discovered was Bonnie Cone Classical Academy, and they were in a delay year. They asked for an increase of more than 200 students and to add 4 additional grade levels, and this was due to an increased demand that they anticipated, that they saw. So they requested to go to 450. That was approved, and their initial enrollment was 276. The actual enrollment was 234. So both of these schools, they were, it was prior to their opening. They were recommended for approval, and the state board did approve their enrollment increases, and neither of the schools met their increased projections. That is the precedent that we have in terms of doing research that was requested from the board. Teller Institute did receive this information, and they have submitted a letter, which hopefully you've been able to review, which was posted on eBoard, and they have argued for their enrollment increase for several reasons, which I'll let them speak about in just a second. But to summarize, the first argument is that their enrollment increase is modest. So they're talking about an additional 30 students as opposed to previous requests that were for far more students. They have also stated that they've spoken about their enrollment targets and the fact that they have 391 active applications for a projected 270 if they were to receive this increase. They also state that they talk about their commitment to educationally disadvantaged students and what their weighted lottery results have shown. They've admitted 33 educationally disadvantaged students, 5 are on the wait list, and they've set a target of 38 if they were to get this enrollment increase. And then also they speak about budgetary concerns and whether they would be able to self-fund the additional enrollment. So this is the update from last month, and OCS said that we would look into it, previous request, and we have brought that information to you. And now I'm going to turn it over to the board for any questions that you might have for staff or for the school's representatives, which I believe Dr. Bott and Miss Cecilia Armour are here today.
Great. I think we've heard the scope of this request. I guess I'll just open it up for board member questions of, they wrote an excellent letter, really detailed. So I'll open it up to board members for questions for the Teller folks.
Alex, this is Cheryl. I don't have a question, I have comments. I agree, it's not a large request, but I think in terms of policy, we need to really look at this. We've done it twice, it didn't work out well either time. We all know what startups like. We know the number of people who say they're coming and then change their mind at the last minute. That even happens once you get past startup. I don't think it's a good policy for us to allow schools to change their numbers in their RTO year. I think they need to get open, and then if in fact they ended up with kids on their waiting list and they met their numbers the following year, they can ask for a change to addition to what's in their charter. I just think from a policy standpoint for the board, this isn't a good idea.
And if I could pipe in for a second, Alex, this is Sherry. The board is, speaking of such a small number, you are allowed to go over your numbers. So if you get the 30 additional students, that's great. You just won't get paid for them.
Well, you get local money.
And that's true. You would get a little, but you would get state funding. But if the desire is really that strong and the demand is really that high, then that's another option for you.
Okay, I saw Rita Hare had a hand raised. Dr. Hare.
No, actually, I think that was a previous discussion.
Okay.
That's it. Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Noting, if they have 391 applications for 240 seats, then they have 151, is my math right? Students who don't get a seat. And if just 1 in 5 would enroll, then they could fill those 30 seats. It is the question, do we obviously have precedent, are we going to maintain such a policy? If we are, I think this is an opportunity to allow it. If we determine that we have to put a stop to doing this, we've done it at least twice, maybe only twice in our past, then this would be the time to make that firm decision. I'm impressed with their work, with their application, and with their letter supporting this amendment. So I guess it comes down to policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
This is Bruce Train, if I may share as well. I would echo what my fellow CSAT members are saying. I think that I feel like this is a little bit of a slippery slope of, if we start doing this for one, are we doing it for everyone who has a request? In the big picture of things, particularly this year with a lot of uncertainty heading into next year, 150 students on your waiting list is not that many in the big picture. As Cheryl pointed out, people change their minds all the time throughout the summer months heading into the actual fall. Now, I'm a little concerned about what this does for future applicants. So they have to show us they have a large number on their wait list, then we're just going to give it to them. I know when my school opened, I had 1,000 students on the wait list. I guess I should have came back to CSAP and asked to increase my first year enrollment.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and with my other colleagues. I think part of the problem is that we are now spending time on this, and the school has not even opened yet, and we are having to devote, what is, frankly, we don't have a lot of time, and this, to Rita's point, I agree that great materials. I've been very much supportive of Teller from the beginning, very impressed with their board and their leaders. I think that this is absolutely the juncture to set a precedent where this is not something that we do. And we have some data that supports that the schools that asked for it did not yield the number of students that they asked for. So that was going to be the first question from the State Board of Education. And as I've said, I think as a board, we need to be extremely disciplined about the things we bring forward to them. And this does not meet in my mind, the kind of the nature or the scope of the type of recommendation or thing that we want to tie up their time with, or just draw attention to. And I do think if now is the time to set precedent that, what you put in your application is what you need to start with, and that's that. And if you want to adjust downward, that's fine. I actually think the Office of Charter Schools should be able to approve any downward adjustment because there's really that's kind of the opposite issue, and we want to see schools say, hey, we're projecting less, but really it doesn't matter when you adjust downward. So that's my position. I would impress upon the board that really supported the school and their program, but this is the time, I think, for us to draw a line and say, yeah, we're not going to continue to do this. Other questions?
Make a motion if you like.
Great.
I'll make a motion that we not approve the enrollment increase for Teller Institute.
I second the motion. Philip Parlay.
All right, properly moved in second. Discussion on the motion.
Yeah, this is Bruce. I support the motion. I would rather us be in a situation where they get their doors open and they come back to us a year later and say, look what we've done. Look at their rate list. Let's entertain this in subsequent time, but not right now.
Sure. I also want to just say that I think, again, on the time piece in our analysis, we then are put in a position where we're trying to evaluate the local context and all things that are difficult enough for us to do in the application process, and that's why there's a detailed component of the application process that speaks to that, as well as time invested in that process and discussion and a look at all the other schools. There's just a lot of components that allow us to dig into that deeply in the framework that we provide for the application process. And then we're essentially having to do this again. Frankly, I think we need to tell schools, don't take time doing this. Focus on opening your school. This is not how you need to spend your time in your ready to open process. Just start with what you have. And I think that this would send a clear message to future potential applicants or schools that are looking at a number of applicants that exceed their original projections. All right, any other further comments or discussion on the motion?
Alex, I would assume that moving forward, the Office of Charter Schools would have in place that policy so that charters would know it would stop there. It wouldn't even come this far in the future, any future incident.
Well, yeah. I think that would probably be a legal question, and whether or not a policy such as that needs to go through the rulemaking process or something along those lines. I would defer to the Office of Charter Schools. I'm not. I think it would be more. Hey, this is how the board has handled this. This is how I handled it last year. I guess I'll defer to Dave and the legal team on
it. Chairman Quigley, this is Dave. I don't think it would require or I wouldn't recommend a policy. This is more of a procedure. And whenever an applicant would come to us asking for this, we would certainly advise that the chances of getting approved are very slim and that we encourage them to concentrate on getting open. But as far as needing a policy, I don't think that would be the wise way to go right now.
Right, so we have a motion on the table. It's been moved and seconded. So any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call for we need a roll call vote for this.
Terry Stoops.
Aye.
Joel Ford. Bruce Friend.
Aye.
Rita Hare.
Aye.
Lynn Kroger.
Aye.
Philip Parlay.
Aye.
Sherry Reeves.
Aye.
Cheryl Turner. Heather Van Cannon.
Aye.
Alex Quigley.
Aye.
And Ashley, I see Joel Ford's hand is up, so I think he tried to respond.
All right, thank you. So the amendment is not recommended, but it will move forward to state board as it must in the next month's meeting. All right.
All right, great.
Am I good to move to the next one?
Yes.
Okay. So we have one other amendment today, and this comes from KIP ENC and KIP Charlotte. So we have several KIP schools that operate in North Carolina. Get my notes. We have the 3 campuses in Gaston. We have Halifax and Durham, which operate under KIP ENC. And then we also have KIP Charlotte. Together, they used to operate separately. What they want to do now, what they're coming to today to request is to merge. And so they would merge under a central organization called KIP North Carolina Public Schools. And the amended charters would allow for the governing board of KIP North Carolina, which would be a new 501c3 incorporated in North Carolina, to simultaneously serve as the governing boards of both KIP ENC and KIP Charlotte. So all of those boards and schools coming together under kind of like a central office. ENC and KIP Charlotte would continue to operate as 2 separate 501c3s responsible for the charters they hold, but their board membership would change to represent the others' membership in that of KIP North Carolina. And then on July 1st of this year, a central staff employed and supported by KIP North Carolina would begin to instructionally and operationally support the schools of KIP ENC and KIP Charlotte. We have a representative today here from KIP ENC, Mr. St. Singh, and they have submitted, as you can see in the PDF, lots of information from the schools, their data and information regarding what exactly the merger would look like. And so now I'm going to if you have questions for staff or if you have questions for the KIP ENC folks, they should be on the line as well.
Thank you, Ashley. All right, let's, yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
How many schools are we talking about?
This is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe. Gaston, Halifax, and Durham are the KIP ENC schools, and then Charlotte.
They list 9 signatures because they have elementary and middle. Is it not 9 schools?
No, it's these are I believe they're like, some of the schools have multiple, they have a primary, they have a middle school, they have a high school, etc.
Okay, considered one school. Okay.
Yeah.
This is Terry Stoops, and this is a question for the KIP representatives. Is this a model that exists in other states? And is the idea behind this model something that is generated by the National KIP organization, or is it unique to North Carolina?
Hey, Terry, this is Tim Sansing. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Sansing. I'm the actual shared executive director between KIP Eastern North Carolina and KIP Charlotte. It's good to be with all of you today. Originally from northern Davidson County. Dr. Hare, I'm looking at your square, proud original native son of northern Davidson County, and I've been working in New York City for the last 20 years. It's good to be back home, leading our efforts in Eastern North Carolina and Charlotte. The KIP Foundation, which is the national network, is supportive of this particular merger. While the merger structure looks different from state to state, they're encouraging states and regions to effectuate these types of mergers, to take full advantage of a lot of the instructional and operational bonuses that come with merging the 2 smaller regions into one. So this model might look different from state to state. We did it for the purposes of covenants that we need to honor here in ENC in Charlotte. But the overall impact of merging the instruction and operational model is similar to other KIPP regions across the country.
And I'll have another question for Mr. Singh. So how, most of the schools are in the northeastern part of the state, or in the northern part of the state, up around the Raleigh-Durham area. How are parents in Charlotte going to have access to the board and to their local issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've spent hours on this particular question. So we are being very, very thoughtful about the board composition of both the North Carolina board and then, of course, the representatives for ENC and Charlotte. Those are 3 boards, all of which are going to share the same composition. And as we are going about fielding boards, we're trying to take from the current boards 4 members of the current board to serve on the KIPP North Carolina board, so 4 from Charlotte and 4 from ENC, all of whom are situated, live in, primary residence in the counties in which, so Mecklenburg, Northampton, Halifax counties, Durham County here in the central part of the state. And then we are actively recruiting additional board members to fill out that board. For instance, there are no alums sitting on either of the 2 boards, and we are actively recruiting alums from North Carolina, for instance, who are still living in Northampton or Halifax counties to be part of that board. We've been around for 20 years in Eastern North Carolina, been around for 15 in Charlotte, so it's due time for us to have some alums representative on the board. And we believe that based on that sort of thoughtful construction of the board across all 3 of those geographies, that parents, families, teachers, administrators, ultimately students will have access to the representatives from those geographies.
I can speak for this is Alex. I've known Tim for a number of years through kind of just shared interest in work serving schools that are serving low-income students. His his background and pedigree and experience for managing an organization at the scale of this scale is I think appropriate. And certainly even exceeds it. He was a founding director of operations for an Uncommon School in New York. He also was the founding chief operating officer for Relay Graduate School of Education, and has done turnaround work in Texas through some work with Relay, and is really a leader in this work nationally. And I've been talking to him for years, trying to figure out how he was going to make it back to North Carolina, and I'm very excited to have him here, and that he is taking on this challenge so that students will receive an excellent education at KIPP schools and potentially grow over time. As I talked about the applications at the state board, that the idea that homegrown replications are, for schools that are successful, it's something that we want to see more of. I'm encouraged by this. Obviously, KIPP is a national organization in some ways, but for those of you that aren't as familiar with KIPP, it's not like a EMO a centrally controlled organization. It's more diffuse. There's a national foundation that supports and funds and coaches and develops the leadership and the teachers on the ground, and has massive and truly incredible shared resources and design elements around curriculum and development. But the KIP was founded by Tammy Sutton in North Carolina. It was founded by Tammy Sutton and Caleb Dolan in a peanut field in Halifax County, not to get romantic or reminisce. And this is one of has kept Gaston, and it has been one of the best schools in the state, and in many ways was a seed. Henderson Collegiate was kind of an extension in a lot of ways. They're very different, but Eric taught at KIP and learned a lot from Caleb Dolan and Tammy, and replicated that at Henderson. And I think I'm just excited because I think I see a bold future for KIP North Carolina, and I'm excited that there's a lot of details here, but I think, I certainly trust the leadership and trust him. Feel excited to see this homegrown school that started many years ago and began to replicate, kind of tighten and get its practices tighter and grow over time and have an even greater impact. So I'll just say that about Tim, because I know he's not going to say those things about himself.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Joel Ford, I appreciate that background and summary. I want to go back to the composition of the board and make sure that I understand that each of the merged schools will have representation from a geographical standpoint. So if I could get what does that composition look like by way of oversight and governance for the schools, I would appreciate that.
Hey, Joel, this is Tim, same thing. I am happy to share with you either now or offline, or I defer to your processes. I'm happy to share now of what we've done around board recruitment at the moment, who from the current two boards are members of, or soon to be members of KIP North Carolina, should this be successful, and also where our outreach efforts are concentrated at the moment. I'm happy to speak to that now, or I'm not sure exactly how that process works, but happy to do whatever.
I'll tell you what would be helpful if you could give me the number and an overview, because one of the things that I'm concerned about is making sure that the board is representative of the community in which these schools sit. Right? And so if you could just, summarize what does that look like? I just want to make sure that corporate, the leadership is conscious about the board composition, and I don't want to leave anyone or any segment of our community behind as it relates to what KIP is looking to do from a corporate standpoint and more importantly, from a consolidation standpoint, right?
Yeah, for sure, Joel, and I appreciate the question very much. It's how I spent in the waking moments, now thinking about post-pandemic and testing and raising of achievement scores and the like. This is also how I've spent a large part of my last 7 months since joining. And to be clear, there's not a KIP national agenda being pushed here. This is very much the two boards of the organization recognizing that we've been operating in silos for the better part of the last decade and a half, and facing down very similar challenges. We could do that better together than separate. So this is very much a local boards from both organizations coming together and effectuating this change. But at the moment, I am looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 board members that we have, that both boards have at least vetted and decided to move on to advance to KIP North Carolina board. Of those 8, 5 are from Eastern North Carolina. So think of our most rural region out in Northampton and Halifax counties and Durham, and 3 are from Charlotte. Our concentration for efforts is to increase representation in both Charlotte and in Durham, so that Charlotte has at least 1 more and Durham has at least 1 more, and then opening up the process for other geographies around the state when that time comes. So that's what the status is right now. I'm actively recruiting between now and July 1st for that board composition. But right now it's about evenly split, and will continue to be so with the engagement of new board members as they come on.
Thank you for that clarification, and I appreciate you being thoughtful and considerate. Again, appreciate, respect the work. I'm encouraged by the work, and the work of educating our students continues. I just wanted to make sure, and for the record, that we, from a board and oversight standpoint, recognize the geographical and cultural differences of our great state, and that your board is reflective of that. And I'm okay. I'm satisfied. And again, want you guys to be super successful in what I know is some challenging work, but for kids who I know not only need the love and support, but who need the professionalism and dedication that is needed into this environment to educate our kids.
Yes, sir. And Joel, the last thing I will share with you, because I very much believe in everything that you were saying, and I'm hopeful that my application to you all is reflective of that. The other component of this board composition for me is to make sure that the majority of the governing board is reflective of the kids and families and communities that we serve. And I'm very proud that at least the work that I've done to date, that the majority of the individuals that comprise this board identify as individuals of color, including the chairman identifies as a man of color. And I'm not yet done in my recruitment efforts, and I am dedicated to making sure that both the governing boards and the central office and the leadership of schools and the teachers that are standing in front of classrooms are representative of the kids that we serve. I'm doing that at every single corner that I'm turning. So I hope you hear from me a dedication for not just the geographical representation, but also the personal identification of the folks who are going to govern this organization.
Thank you.
Okay, board members, other questions? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion on this one.
So is Terry Stoops, I move to approve the amendment.
All right. I have a second.
Second. Board.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, so Terry and Joe, Joel, Terry Stoops and Joel Ford, motion and second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, we'll call for a roll call vote.
Terry Stoops,
Aye.
Joel Ford,
Aye.
Bruce Friend,
Aye.
Rita Hare,
Aye.
Lynn Kroger,
Aye.
Hilda Burley,
Aye.
Sherry Reeves,
Aye.
Cheryl Turner, Cheryl, oh, I got you. Heather Van Cannon,
Put it in chat, Ashley.
Aye.
okay, thank you. Alex Quigley.
Aye.
All right, it passes unanimously.
Great.
And forward it to State Board, Mr. St. Sing, and I'll keep you updated.
Thanks, Ashley.
All right, are we ready for the next presentation?
We are ready. Let's do it.
All right. So this will be quick. This is just an update on our low-performing schools. There was a session law last year that requires schools previously identified as low-performing or continually low-performing, based on the data from the 2018 to 19 school year, which is the last accountability data we have available, or most recent. Those schools continue as low-performing or continually low-performing identification on the low-performing school list. Therefore, their school improvement plan requirements continue, and they continue to do the work they need to do on NC Star, as well as let parents know that and stakeholders know that they are low-performing or continually low-performing. As a reminder, low performing is a school performance grade of a D or an F, and met or not met expected growth. And then continually low performing means that a school has been low performing at least 2 of the last 3 years. So the last time I gave you a low performing presentation was in the fall of 2019, I believe, after the accountability data was released. And at that time, we had 38 continually low-performing schools. 3 of those have closed. So just as a current kind of update on where we're at, we have 35 continually low-performing schools, which again means that they were low-performing 2 out of the last 3 years. So it gets a little tricky because it could be, they could have been low-performing for 2 years, and then last year they weren't low-performing. It can be any combination of those, those 3 years. If we break it down, we have a total of 44 operating charter schools that are either continually low performing or low performing. We had 30 that are continually low performing, 5 that are continually low performing but not low performing the last year. So, we would hope that perhaps they would have been moving out of the low performing list. This brings to mind United Community, who you heard from last year, schools that were making progress, but because of the 3-year term that we look at, they were still considered continually low performing. And then 9 who were low performing, but not continually low performing. So perhaps they were just low performing that last year. We have data. Based on what Dr. Howard presented today, we might have another year of these schools continuing to be on this list with no movement. But this is kind of where we're at now. We have 44 schools that we're looking at. Our office, because there has been no new data, our office did email all the low performing schools notice of the Senate bill that was passed last year. They received notice that they retain that low performing status. They received notice about their NC Star school improvement plan requirements. They also received information about their regional case manager contacts, and they were requested to fill out basically a report to give us some in-office data about how the school is doing. So it covered everything from asking for internal data summaries to staffing to if there had been any leadership or board changes, that sort of thing. They were notified, and then they were given 2 additional notices and extension of deadlines. And then in addition, they received notifications from the NC Star team and performance framework teams regarding the requirements for low performing schools. We had 41 schools. 5 of those did not return the reporting to our office. I have heard from 2 of them who have brand new leaders and are really trying to, get their feet under themselves, and we're working with them. And then for the NC Star school improvement plans, 12 out of the 44 did not submit those. There is no extension for that. That's a different team that runs that, and they will be marked non-compliant in the 2020 performance framework. So I wanted to kind of give you a rundown of where we are at, and then ask for, take any questions and ask for any recommendations as far as what the board would like to see from these low performing schools. Would you like to have presentations to CSAB like we've done previously, and perhaps start with the highest risk schools? What, is there anything particular that you want to see? Any recommendations, we are happy to hear and answer any questions about what we have seen so far. Usually, as you know, we would do site visits, but of course this year that has not been possible. There are really no in-person classes for many of these schools to view. So I will open it up for questions and any recommendations you may have.
Ashley, this is Cheryl. I would think that at the very minimum, we need to see the schools that have not met the compliance requirements for low-performing schools. That's scary in and of itself. If you're already struggling and then you can't keep up to do the stuff that's required, that means you're really, really struggling. And I think at a minimum, we need to see those.
Okay.
I agree with Cheryl. This is still the they owe us an explanation or explanations.
Ashley, this is Rita Hare. Of the 40 out of the 44 that did not submit a school improvement plan, have you noted any correlation between those 12 and the list of continually low performing? Are they all CLPs? Are they from both groups? Do you know?
That's a good question. It's a range, I would say. I'm trying to see let's see. For the ones that were reporting to us, like the reports I reviewed were I didn't review all the NC Star ones, but for the 5 that did not do the internal reporting, they are all CLP schools. I would have to look into the NC Star schools. Our office did help the regional support team here at DPI this year with those. Usually that is a separate team that reviews those school improvement plans within the NC Star system. So I do know that there's a mix of schools, and every year, unfortunately, we do have some schools that just do not do it. But I would say probably the majority of them are continually low performing.
Okay, of the 5 of 41, maybe I didn't follow your numbers. What is the 41 group?
Okay, so the 41 is their internal reporting that we requested, and it did not include the 2 virtual schools because we already do a lot of monitoring for them, so they were not included in this. And then and we did not include SEMA, Kaiser Fox, because we were currently working on the closure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley, of the 3 schools you noted that closed, are those schools that closed because of our action or they relinquished their charter?
Now it will actually be 4, but it was Ignite Pitt, which they were non-renewed. It was Charlotte Learning Academy, they were non-renewed. SEMA, which has been, the state board just upheld their revocation. And then Hope Charter Leadership Academy, which was in Wake County, and they relinquished. So
yes, they did. Okay.
Yeah, so one was voluntary, and the other were non-renewals or revocation.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so do we have a kind of decision on how we want to move forward?
It sounds like it. I will definitely reach out to the schools that did not submit the reports to our office and start with kind of prioritizing them for presentations to the CSAB, if that pleases everyone.
Yeah,
That's a good place to start, Ashley. I think also we need to understand why the others are not, submitting that school improvement plan. That's very troubling.
Okay. That sounds like a good next step.
Okay.
Let's move forward.
Right. Let's see, what's up next? All right, we have Ms. Rackley. She's going to speak a little bit about changes to the application and the application process that we previously discussed. Melanie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, CSAB. So before you today, we will discuss the 2021 charter school application process. So this is for the upcoming application cycle. And again, just to, remind everyone that this is up for discussion. So you all can take these recommendations and then flesh them out a little bit further. Okay, Ashley. And so a lot of conversation was centered around submitting supplemental information after the original application was submitted. So what you see here are options, and you all will decide how you want to proceed to kind of avoid the clerical and just the burdensome document management that was allowed during the cycle. We could opt to either not allow any supplemental or revised information throughout the entire application process. So essentially what you see is what you get. Or we could allow supplemental or revised information requested after round one interviews with particular parameters. And so we'd have to kind of explore what those parameters would be. Some options that were discussed in our last meeting would be, how long would the applicant board have to submit the requested documentation? It sounds like we had agreed upon 10 calendar days as a recommendation. Also limiting the number of documents that could be submitted. So only what CSAB requests would be what the board would actually be able to send into our office. And then we'd have to devise a process for that so that it would be streamlined, it would be recorded and well documented what submissions were received by OCS and forwarded on to CSAB. So again, this is just around general process improvement. And then just as a side note that there would not be any additional written responses to the external evaluators. They would not be accepted or submitted into the Illusion platform. So all of this would be supplemental and none of it would be entered into our application system. Thank you. Next slide, please. And just some processes that we discussed for improvement at our last meeting, reducing the time for the second round. So there would not be a need for the opening statement. This would shave off some time up front. I would still do, and OCS staff would still provide the 5 minutes of introduction, and then CSAB would just jump right into the Q&A session, followed by a deliberation and a vote, and then there would be a 5-minute summation and closing statement by the applicant, reducing this down from 1 hour to hopefully the 45-minute total time. And then thoughts to streamline or maybe have an objective list of questions, limiting those questions, and then obviously getting them in written form. So making sure that we have a guide as to what would be asked in the second round, just so, again, working with this process to really have a more objective way to capture what we need in the second round. And then the committee lead there would be in charge of deciding which questions to ask. And again, they would be in written form so that we would have the streamline and the paper trail of what would be submitted to CSAB. So a real process, putting a real process in place. Next slide, please. Okay, and so then, you all are needing to discuss and determine what the criteria would be for deciding who is able to go for a second round. So what does that look like? And again, some of the guidance is that the application would be approved barring minor revisions or clarifications. Making sure that the applicant board is strong and cohesive enough and can answer all questions with clarity and knowledge, and that there would not be any need for major revisions to the application. Because obviously the material revisions would require necessary amendment changes. So again, just kind of fine-tuning the process to determine what second round means for folks. And then OCS would be working to develop a rubric, score sheet for applicants, and in order to score, to figure out if a particular board is able to move forward for a second round. So really just making the process more objective, which is a plus, but also it can hinder moving an applicant to the second round. Obviously some folks may not, based upon a score sheet, objective score sheet, may not be able to move forward. So that could be, viewed as a necessary minus. And if you all have any questions at any time, you feel free to chime in here. Next slide. And just as in terms of the actual capacity interview and just using some features a little bit better and enhancing our process, just using on-screen timers, and then making sure that we have a designated timekeeper in place for each application. And then something that OCS staff are working to develop is, prior to the interview, making sure that boards are able to basically receive training prior to the interview process. So what we're thinking to do, rather than have to do it each time, is to pre-record and have it available on our website so that boards are aware of the capacity interview process well ahead of their scheduled interview date. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and so for the 2021 charter application improvement, some of the questions and processes that would be improved, being changed this time, would be obviously the legislative purpose. That's been central to our focus in the capacity interviews. And so what we're posed to do, and what our vendor knows, is that we are updating the legislative purpose question and the formatting there, where it would be check boxes and a brief narrative. So the applicant board, when they're applying, would have to indicate which legislative purposes are being fulfilled and provide a brief narrative. So that will allow us strategically to align with the legislative purpose and kind of to call those out much easier than in the past. And so we would also include any legislative purpose in that cheat sheet that the one pager that we give during the presentation. So we will actually extract that information out from the application and provide that to CSAB at each interview. We will also revert back to a previously used enrollment template because it seems that with the enrollment projections that were provided this cycle, schools were providing us with an abundance of enrollment information, and it was not as user-friendly as it should have been. So the template that had been used in the past was a lot simpler, and we actually were able to get the data that we were asking for much more effectively. So we'll go back to using that in Illusion. They already have that template in their possession. And so then the applications team has been talking about completeness checks. I mean, there were some applications due to various reasons where the supplemental information came in. So we, as OCS, would need a quick all hands on deck, similar to the RTO process, where OCS staff reviews each application to make sure that background checks and specific attachments have been provided. Typically, the application narrative, making sure the mission, vision, the purpose is provided, the goals are uploaded, and the education plans are provided. So we will work to kind of make sure that the completeness check process It's not an indication of quality, but to make sure that the attachments are there, that folks have not uploaded blank documents, budget templates are in place. So a really quick check to make sure that there's no cutoffs with margins, etc. Making sure that visually we have what we need in place on those applications. Because obviously, again, material items that would otherwise require an amendment, should be included with the application in order for it to be deemed complete. Okay, and so next slide, please.
Excuse me, Melanie, this is Heather Perlin. As part of the application improvements, did you include any area for the same-sex school questions and requirements?
Actually, we do have that. I need to probably get that language. Let's make sure we have that language tightened up and the legal team make sure that we have everything exactly as it should be.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Perlin.
You're welcome.
Okay, and then let's see here, some additional improvements for the application process. The vendor is exploring the mapping capabilities. Obviously, that's kind of robust and it's kind of a tall order, not something that will necessarily happen in the upcoming cycle. But if schools are aware of or have a facility or aware of their zip code, then whether or not there's some mapping capabilities that we would be able to use, that would greatly reduce and kind of streamline the process. So at a minimum though, what we're asking in this current cycle are zip code questions up front, because the current process is that we contact those boards prior to their CSAB interview to develop the maps. If we know their potential facility zip code ahead of time, that it gives us a head start on that process. So we will ask for that zip code information if they have potential facility locations. We will also refine the EMO, CMO question to better capture if any third-party assistance was used in the development of applications. As you all may recall, there were certain applicant boards that actually did receive assistance. It was unclear with some, and so we are refining the language to make sure that if a charter support organization was used in the development of the applications, we will capture that information in the application process. And then finally, we have updates to the budget template to include the fiscal year 20 allotment figures. Like the current template that you see has those fiscal year 19 numbers. So I've already worked with vendors in providing them with the updated figures so that budget templates, as folks are doing their projections, more accurately reflect those allotments for the fiscal year 20. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of recap, the application will clearly articulate those legislative purposes being met, focusing on the most compelling. And so again, it would not be a list of every curriculum or program, but what they do and what they intend to do, and giving us a brief narrative of that. And then enrollment needs to be well thought out. With our use of the older version of the enrollment template, we believe that this will be captured more effectively. And again, as we've seen today and elsewhere, it's unlikely that amendments to change would be approved. So again, what you see is what you get. And so we are encouraging boards as part of our application trainings to research the demand and saturation in their area prior to completing their enrollment numbers. So that really concludes what I have today. And if any questions, I am here to answer those.
This is great work. Excited to see the changes in the process. Other comments folks want to jump in with?
Alex, this is Sherry. I just have a few comments as I was thinking. First of all, Melanie, super job. I think every year we have continued to make improvements to the process, and this is going to be just another fine example of that. For me, as an evaluator, what was frustrating was
and items were supposed to be, submitted and they were not. And I know one of the comments you made was that if we accept supplemental materials, then they would not be able to be recorded into the, platform with Edlusion. And I know for me, when I'm reviewing, I'm all in, if I have to go searching for something somewhere else, that was a fault of the old program too. It was very frustrating for me. And the other thing that we never got mapped out this year with Edlusion was being able to see the outside evaluators' comments. And I just think that that was important. So I just think, for me, making sure that the application is absolutely complete before it gets moved forward is critical. And that, you know, if we were to accept supplemental materials, they would need to be very, very limited, because that just makes our job that much more difficult.
Yes, ma'am, and that's noted. And one thing to point out as well is that the vendor is working on additional access levels, particularly so that CSAP can see the external evaluation comments. So they are actually, you know, building in additional access levels so that you all can see all of the evaluations. So there was a real needed discussion, and Dave and others were on that meeting to understand the need for particular viewing rights for CSAP, and then, you know, who can see what. And obviously you all need to see the greatest amount of information. So that is part of the process improvement.
Ms. Rackley, this is Rita Hare. I agree, great work on summarizing this process for us and helping us make it better, improve it. I wondered about round 2. You mentioned maybe we can make a list of questions for the second round. I could just throw this out there for my fellow board members, that I would even be open to, if a school coming back for the second round, that each member submit a question we had to our leads, so that the lead is the one doing that interview and they already know what the questions will be, and each of us aren't trying to come back with another question or have input. I think that might streamline that second round a little. And you kind of referred to that. You mentioned maybe a list of questions, but I think even a list submitted to interviewers and let them handle the questions. I've never really had a problem identifying the legislative purposes in the application, so I wasn't sure what we were trying to solve there, but maybe it's been a problem for others. And finally, I really like the idea of the online timer. I think a visual is always great. So if you see the clock ticking, you know that you got to bring it to a close. So I think that's a great suggestion. So thank you for these. Yeah, I do like the very beginning, those revisions. I don't think we want to say absolutely no revisions submitted from that first round, because we might regret that. But it does need to be something that we requested to be submitted with a timeline for when it has to be submitted. Thanks, Ms. Rackley.
Thank you.
This is Mr. Friend. Thank you for your work on this. I would echo some of the sentiments from my other board members here. I definitely am in agreement that, you know, the application they submit is the application we're reviewing. Any additional materials should be things that we asked for, not that they decide after the fact they think we should want or to read. Yeah, I do agree with Sherry that I think if we could have those in one spot, that just makes it a heck of a lot easier. I found myself having to go in, it might be in an email, it might be in an Edlusion, it might be somewhere else, and just not feeling I had a sense of where everything was at. I put in the chat, and I don't necessarily need to eliminate the opening statement, but as part of their training, and then that'll maybe I'm showing my age, I'm being a little old school, but you know, if you're told you have 5 minutes for an opening statement, that's what you have. And if you need 10, from my first introduction to you, you can't follow the rules. And so that sounds quite harsh, but I think that opening statement to me is fine as long as they know your 5 minutes or whatever it is that you're done. So yeah, I just echo that. The other thing I maybe, and maybe this is just my own personal preference, I think my different opinion would be a CSAP review them and have our questions ready. I'd like it maybe that we could put get all of our questions out there, and then let the applicant respond. I think sometimes we get caught into, well, I have a question and the applicant responds to it, and that response can take a long time. And Sherry or Alex might have a question that they never get to, so it may be procedurally if we just get all of our questions out on the table up front for the applicant to respond to. But thank you for all your work on this.
Yeah, so this is sort of probably, I like Bruce's idea there too. And it does save time for everyone, and we would have had time to think about our questions before the day that the applications are presented. So yeah, so let's work on that too. Thanks, Melanie.
Welcome.
I just wanted to clarify, following up from Rita's point about the legislative purposes, that's for the State Board of Ed. So we have received some questioning around, what is the legislative purpose of this? Is the school innovative? How does it meet the legislative purposes? So I think getting schools to stamp that really, really clearly, and then making sure that we ask about it so it's reflected in the minutes, is to ensure that when we bring a school forward, that we clearly articulated those purposes.
Thank you, Chair Quigley. That's good, and I understand that. Thank you.
Any other questions for me? Darren?
All right. Well, thank you. This is great. I think we're going to make a lot of progress. And I think prepping the applicants that are going to have their interviews beforehand is just going to be awesome. So I look forward to watching this process from afar.
Thank you.
All right, we have an NC Access update. Mr. Whalen, are you available?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, board members. We'll be pretty quick, and I will turn it over to our sub-grant program manager, Davida, in just a second to give you an update on applications submitted. Just as a real quick update on the support side, we're continuing with fellowship sessions, really great fellowship session in February. We have another one coming up this Thursday, actually as a makeup from January, and then another session later this month as well. And we're also continuing to offer professional development free to all charter schools throughout the state. So we've completed 8 sessions so far this spring, and we have another 15 that are upcoming. And we've had generally no less than 40 people attend any one of those sessions, and we've had upwards of over 100 in some cases. And so we've gotten some really great feedback and response to that as well. And then so part of that, an additional partnership that we're beginning right now, is offering those sessions free of charge to candidates in the North Carolina A&T Masters of School Administration program. So a partnership with A&T to be able to offer some of this free equity-focused development to candidates within the MSA program. So we're excited about that and working with some of those members as well. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Davida to give you an update. Since we last met in February, we have passed the deadline to submit applications, so she's going to be able to give you an update on where we stand now.
Thank you, Jay. Good morning to the Charter School Advisory Board members. Again, just to reiterate, my name is Davida Robinson, and I am the Access Subgrant Program Manager. The deadline for charter schools to submit a subgrant application was Monday, March 1st. And out of the 25 eligible charter schools, 22 submitted a complete application. The following 3 charter schools did not submit an application. That was Mountain Discovery, Falls Lake Academy, and Tiller School. In addition, we have recruited experienced professionals that will serve on the review committee for the 2021 subgrant application cycle. And these external evaluators have completed training and have been invited to Epicenter to begin reviewing applications. NC Access plans to bring recommendations to this board at the May meeting. And board members, I just want to reiterate that there are 18 remaining subgrants to award, and we anticipate awarding anywhere from 10 to 15 this year. And we do plan to run one more cycle of subgrants next year. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Any questions for the Access team? All right, exciting work, thank you all. All right, at this time, we'll hear from Director Machado.
Thank you, Chairman Quigley, and we will get you out of here at 12:45 when we run on schedule. This has been a great meeting, and I really appreciate my DPI colleagues for sharing and bringing you up to date on some really great information. So I appreciate them doing that. And also want to give our CSAB an update. Melanie and the application team is working on a new timeline that we'll put into place hopefully the following year, where we'll move the entire process up about 6 months, where the goal would be to take the applications to State Board for discussion in November and voting in December. That would give our charter schools a good 18 months to get open. Because we're certainly seeing where it just takes more than the 12 months to get through your facility issues and even some of your enrollment issues. So we look forward to bringing that to you in the next couple of months. To give you some State Board of Ed updates, they did vote to revoke SEMA's Kaiser's charter for the State Board of Ed's Appeal Board recommendation, and I want to thank Lynn Kroger for agreeing to serve on that appeals board. And I want to give actually a huge shout out for preparing that presentation and presenting it to the appeal board. That's a lot of work and really appreciate that. The renewal recommendations were approved with a lot of discussion and with a friendly amendment. And I want to read this amendment to you so you're aware of what they're asking our office and CSAB to do. It says further that the EICS Board Committee, in consultation with the agency and with CSAB, undertake a review of the charter school renewal process and come back to the State Board for discussion of proposed revisions to, clarifications of, and proposed guidelines for how such renewal requests should be processed for recommendation by the department and CSAB, and then handled for proposed approval by the State Board. Further, that the recommendations for how to best proceed with this renewal process come back to the board by its September 2021 monthly meeting for discussion and thereafter approval by the board. So before I briefly discuss this friendly amendment, I want to thank Cheryl and Alex for being willing to present. You guys did a fantastic job answering their questions, and to Dr. Cooper for having all the information that was needed to be able to present. So our office plans on doing a deep dive into the renewal process. I think it's important that the State Board of Ed understands how much work goes into looking at the data of these schools, how much work CSAB does in making these recommendations, and also plan on making sure that we include Dr. Stegall in this process. He's been very helpful and has been willing to help us in this process. So we will keep you abreast. We'll certainly be bringing you timely updates so we can get your feedback so we can make the best presentation for September. They did approve the virtual charter school enrollment report. They approved the enrollment increase request for Shining Rock, Moore County Montessori, and Unity Classical Charter School. Approved North Raleigh's request for a second-year delay. Approved Triangle Math and Science Academy's high school relocation request. And approved Queen City STEM's request for a weighted lottery. They discussed the following information: the 2020 charter application recommendations. And again, thanks for Chairman Quigley for being the one that presented that. Discussed Kestrel Heights Charter School's request to amend their mission statement, their lunch program, and transportation plan. Also discussed the Wilmington School of Arts request to revise their grade served. And also discussed the 2021 charter school application timeline. The charter school the information took up almost the whole afternoon of the first day, and I appreciate my team for preparing all the documents that need to be prepared. As far as Officer Charter School updates, we've already done 6 renewal visits this month, and I think we have 2 scheduled for this week. We're collecting state employee credit union scholarship applications from charter high school seniors. 3 scholarships will be awarded to our seniors, and I appreciate Dr. Jones's hard work on that. Really excited to announce that this year we'll be having the first ever Charter School Principal of the Year Award. The first year we're going to do this just in-house, and then the following year it will be part of DPI's Principal of the Year. This is something we've been working on for a long time, and really excited to finally get this into action. Charter One has agreed to be the sponsor, because we needed to have a sponsor to move forward. And again, I want to thank Dr. Jones for his hard work on that. RTO session 4 went very well. It was a virtual session. Claire's done an excellent job organizing the virtual component. I think it's proven to us and our stakeholders that we can do these trainings virtual. So even when we're back face-to-face, we certainly want to keep a virtual component going. Jay gave you a great update on the NC Access Fellows Program, and just another great initiative with the students of NC, North Carolina A&T, participating in our professional development. I say this all the time, if there's a state using the CSP grant any better than North Carolina, man, I would love to see it. That team is doing an excellent job. Another thing that we'll be participating in is a charter school teacher focus group. We're working with Julie Pittman. She's a superintendent's advisor for education engagement. We have selected 10 teachers across from North Carolina that will be making up this focus group. There'll be a visit to our charter school, hopefully once a month or at least every other month, with DPI senior leadership. And at the end of the visit to the charter school, there'll be a virtual roundtable with this teacher group. This is a very exciting opportunity for our teachers to share with DPI senior leadership their ideas, their concerns, their input. So we're very, very excited about that. And in closing, I want to congratulate Wilson Prep for winning the North Carolina 1A Men's Basketball State Championship. Very excited to say that the championship was an all-charter school final, and Wilson Prep was able to beat Lincoln Charter School in a very close game. So a very exciting time for the charter school movement.
Yeah, so that's all I had. Real self-discipline there, Dave.
I know. I was really proud of Wilson Prep. I was reading where they only played 4 or 5 games because of COVID restrictions and things like that. And then to be able to finish the season like they did, very encouraging. Very enthusiastic group of players and coaches. So it was a great game. That's all.
All right, 12:48. Any further comments or questions? All right, thank you to the Office of Charter Schools for all the work that goes into preparing for this meeting. We're grateful for all that you do. Thank you, board members, for your engagement today. Happy to report that this wraps up our meeting for March, and yeah, it's only half a day. So once you get through those applications, it gets a lot easier. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again in April. Have a great day, everyone. Can I get a motion? Can I get a motion?
You got the motion to adjourn.
This is Lynn, I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Hi, everybody.
Sorry, who motioned to adjourn?
I got it, Melanie, don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you.